Chapter 301, Possessed by a Demon. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. There was infinite darkness. There wasn't any trace of light. Even time seemed to have become unclear and deceptive. It seemed as if every moment was taking thousands of years to flow. Shi Mu suddenly opened his eyes. He felt as if he had woken from a nightmare. He tried to move his body, but his body refused to comply. Instead, a fit of acute pain started to spread from every part of his body. He felt a strange taste in his throat, and he nearly puffed out a mouthful of blood. He got scared by this. So, he gave up on the thought of trying. Shi Mu swept his gaze around, but couldn't see anything except for the endless darkness. He moved his hand to feel his body, and discovered that the surrounding area was the boundless sea water. Seabed. He was stunned for a moment. But then, a pale golden light gleamed in his eyes, and the surrounding area became crystal clear to him. He indeed lay down at the bottom of the sea at the moment. His whole body was surrounded by corals and strange plants. Some plants looked like palm leaf fans, while some were very smooth like a lower millstone. They were of vibrant colors. They were glittering, and emitting strange brilliance in the swaying sea water. A cluster of beautiful and lustrous small fishes would sometimes gather near him. And, they would shuttle back and forth between the corals in a playful manner. However, Shi Mu's brows creased since a strange feeling had suddenly struck his heart. He saw that a shadow appeared in the frontal sea area the next moment. Then, it started to swim in his direction at an extremely fast speed. This shadow was a grey marine beast. Its contour bore a very strong resemblance to that of a shark. Its body was 40 or 50 feet long. It had a cone-shaped head, and its mouth full of sharp fangs seemed similar to double-edged swords. Those sharp fangs were giving off a fierce kind of aura. Shi Mu was alarmed to see that this marine beast was advancing toward him. This beast couldn't be regarded as a very vigorous sea beast. But, Shi Mu was in a paralyzed kind of state at this time. He couldn't even budge an inch. Therefore, his heart couldn't help but pound wildly. The grey sea beast approached him at an alarming speed. Shi Mu squeezed out his entire remaining strength to stimulate the operation of real qi and magic power in his body. However, he soon realized that both his real qi and magic power were nearly exhausted at the moment. So, it was futile to stimulate their operation. Shi Mu's heart was fluttering with a fit of fear. But then, the grey sea beast went past the top of Shi Mu's head in a casual manner. It seemed as if it hadn't even seen him even though he was almost within its reach. Then, the marine beast soon disappeared into the distance. Shi Mu was dumbfounded by this. But then, he looked at his body, and his eyes brightened. He saw that his whole body was shrouded in a layer of transparent light curtain. This light curtain was spherical in shape. He must have failed to notice it since he hadn't seen his body in a careful manner until now. His chest felt a bit hot. Apparently, the source of this light curtain was somewhere on his chest. Shi Mu controlled his breathing for a moment, and succeeded in restoring a bit of his strength. After that, he made an effort to raise his hand. He moved his hand to his chest with difficulty, and fumbled for some time. He then took out a blue pearl in the hollow of his palm. It was the same pearl that Xiang Zhu had bestowed on him. He looked at the clam pearl a few times, and a hint of understanding flashed through his eyes. He reckoned that this pearl must have emitted that light curtain which had hidden him from that sea beast. Shi Mu heaved a sigh of relief when he discovered the role of this pearl. He then put the pearl back into his clothes. He looked around with an expressionless look in his eyes. The fact was that Shi Mu had been swaying in a train of disturbing thoughts at the moment. The only thing that he remembered was that he had fled from the gigantic vast sea boat. He had then been injured by that monstrous octopus sea beast to such an extent that he had fallen unconscious. But, the memories after that were a bit blurry. He could vaguely recall that he had transformed into the white ape once again at the last moment. And then, he had gotten entangled in a bloody hand-to-hand fight with that octopus in the sea. Also, he had sustained further serious injuries in that battle, and had subsequently passed out. He could also recall that he had experienced a dream of the white ape when he was unconscious. He had been incarnated into a white ape once again in that dream. Afterwards, he had been chased down, and almost killed by a colorful robed old man. What does that dreamland want to indicate this time? Shi Mu's eyes flickered as he was pondered over this matter. Oh, that's right, that old man's mount was a 9-headed golden dragon. I had seen that the white ape had slaughtered that 9-headed golden dragon in the sea when I had dreamed of the white ape last time. But, that old man's mount was very small. Is it possible that there's a connection between these two dreams? In addition, there was that ancient golden book. Is it possible? Random thoughts were tumbling in his mind at the moment. The fact was that Shi Mu had decided that he would try to find the rising to the heaven peak once he had reached the western continent. He had thought that he might be able to find some answers related to the mystery of the white ape's memories at the rising to the heaven peak. Also, there should be a lot of secrets related to that ancient golden book 9 Revolutions mysterious art. Shi Mu's heart couldn't help but experience a kind of fervent feeling as this idea popped in his head. But then, he shook his head, and put these thoughts aside for the time being. The most important thing right now was that he had to regain his strength, and leave this place. So, Shi Mu pacified his swaying mind, and regained his equanimity. He sat down cross-legged while leaning against a coral. Then, he fished out a restoration pill and a healing pill from his clothes. After that, he closed his eyes. The real qi in his body gradually grew as the efficacy of the pills spread in his body. Shi Mu opened his eyes after an unknown span of time. Half of his real qi had been restored. Also, his body had recovered a lot. Shi Mu waved his hand, and a bluish-green long shuttle emerged beneath him. It carried him, and flew upwards. Crash bang! Shi Mu darted out of the water with a splashing sound after a moment. The area around him was the boundless sea. However, the horizon of western continent could be seen not far from there. Shi Mu's heart overwhelmed with exhilaration as a result. He stimulated the bluish-green long shuttle, and flew toward his destination. But then, a burst of screeching spread from behind. A black silhouette appeared in midair, and chased after him. Shi Tou, wait for me. Shi Mu heard a familiar and boisterous voice at this moment. Shi Mu stopped the jade shuttle, and the black silhouette approached him quickly. It was Cai. Shi Tou, you're finally awake. You were sleeping for 3 days and 3 nights this time. Cai landed on Shi Mu's shoulder, and said while gasping for breath. So, have you been waiting for me here all this time? Shi Mu asked. I can see the depths of the sea, but I can't drill into the water. So, I was left with no choice but to wait for you outside, Cai replied. Shi Mu's eyes flashed. He couldn't help but recall the situation before his stupor. He was unaware that he had been in an unconscious state for so long. Moreover, only Cai had waited for him to come back. And, this had touched him rather deeply. Shi Tou, how did you become that big white ape that day? Is it due to that barbarian's totem technique that you practice? Cai asked in a somewhat curious manner. It's not because of that secret totem technique. In fact, I'm not too clear about this matter either. The first time that I had transformed into a white ape was a long time ago. Shi Mu hesitated a bit. But then, he shared his experience of transforming into a white ape. He also gave a brief explanation of his frequent dreams of the white ape. Cai appeared to be an ordinary parrot. However, his actual age was much more than that of Shi Mu's. Also, it seemed that he had been summoned by other people before he had been summoned by the young Master Ju. Shi Mu had learnt about these things only recently. Cai, you always keep on bragging about how experienced and knowledgeable you are. So, do you know why I keep experiencing this strange thing? Shi Mu asked. Well, this is a rare case. My experience of many years compels me to say that your situation is somewhat similar to the condition where a demon spirit takes possession of a body, Cai guessed after a momentary consideration. A demon spirit takes possession of a body, what is this again? Shi Mu was startled. Well, let me tell you like this, your situation is almost the same as the barbarians who seal beast spirits in their bodies. I had often heard one of my masters talking about this matter. However, I didn't care about it at the time. Anyway, you must have something in your body that has some relation with that white ape, Cai explained. Perhaps, it may be the case. That warrant to seize and kill me was indeed the main reason behind my choice to go to the Western continent. However, it wasn't the only reason. I also had a kind of premonition that I still haven't been able to shake off my heart. I had felt that the Western continent was crucial to solving the riddle of the White Ape's dreamland, Shi Mu said with a brief nod. So, this is the case. Anyway, the ape that has possessed you is very formidable. After all, it was able to defeat that gigantic octopus. Now, let's rush to the Western continent. Cai eagerly spoke up. Shi Mu nodded, and the bluish-green shuttle under his feet brightened. The shuttle then sped in the direction of the coastline, which still looked like a black line. Oh, by the way, what had happened to Luan and the other people after I fell unconscious? Shi Mu suddenly remembered that he had flown off the ship in order to escape. So? He asked. Those people fled as soon as they saw that you were holding up that octopus sea beast. That bunch of scumbags didn't even stay to assist you. Cai replied. The expression in Shi Mu's eyes changed, and he cracked into a soft chuckle. Oh, by the way, had Luan and the others discovered that the white ape was my incarnation? Shi Mu's eyebrows plunged into a frown as he thought of this matter. No, they were under the impression that the white ape had suddenly appeared from somewhere. The situation had taken a very uproarious form after the ship you were on board was attacked and sent to the bottom of the sea. Everyone had been concerned about their own safety. So, nobody had the time to think about anything. Even Luan thought that you had died in that attack, Cai said. That's wonderful. I will seize this opportunity to get rid of Luan's entanglement. Shi Mu's facial expression loosened, and he said with a nod. Shi Mu finally arrived at the coastline after over 2 hours of flying. Then, he set foot in the land of the Western continent for the first time in his life. He stood on the pale yellow sand by the side of the seacoast, and swept his vision around. There was a grand forest with luxuriant foliage not far from here. But, Shi Mu wasn't familiar with the majority of species present here. In addition, unusually lofty trees could also be seen here. This forest was very similar to the dense forest that he had seen in the Portal of Brave Warriors. The scorching sun was high up in the sky. It was emitting scalding and dazzling rays of light. The tree leaves would issue a crisp sound like that of gurgling water whenever the sea breeze found its way through the leaves of the forest. Shi Mu closed his eyes, and took a long and deep breath. And, he felt the surge of an excessively soothing feeling in his body the next moment. The heavenly and spiritual energy that prevailed in the atmosphere of this place was exceptionally rich. It was much superior to that of the eastern continent. This place is a treasure trove. It looks like the land of this place has never been put under the plough. Therefore, the resources it contains are far beyond the resources of the eastern continent. No wonder the Dark Moon cult wanted to relocate their people to this continent. Shi Mu opened his eyes, and said. Cai nodded repeatedly. Simultaneously, he continued to observe the surrounding area in an inquisitive manner. Shi Mu swept his gaze around a couple of times. He wished to set out on an exploration trip of this continent right away, but it wasn't the right time to do so. He walked toward the forest near the sea's surface, and sat down cross-legged under a towering tree. Cai, be on your guard, and keep watch on the circumferential situation for me. Shi Mu shook his head, and cast these thoughts off his mind for the time being. Then, he said to Cai. Cai complied, and flew up in the sky. He then landed on the lofty tree Shi Mu was seated under, and started to sweep his glance at the surrounding area. Shi Mu again took out a restoration pill from his clothes, and started the operation of his cultivation art. Nearly half a day seemed to have passed in a flash. Shi Mu finally opened his eyes. His eyes seemed to be projecting two beams of cold light. He shook his sleeves and stood up. The hint of a delightful smile hung on his face. This place was loaded with plentiful sources of spiritual energy. The wonderful atmosphere had allowed him to restore his real qi and magic power to its peak within half a day. Moreover, the injuries of his body had completely healed. Shi Tou, are you all right? Cai swooped down. Let's go and explore this new continent. Shi Mu moved his head in a nod. Then, he looked toward the depths of the forest, and said with great enthusiasm. Cai was also bubbling with zestful excitement. So, he issued a few strange and excited quack sounds. Then, he flew up, and started to hover around Shi Mu once again. Chapter 302, Tree Demon in the Woods. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu slowly walked ahead in the forest while sweeping his gaze around. The deeper he walked into the forest, the taller the surrounding trees became. In fact, the trees in this place were so huge that several people could simultaneously wrap their arms around a tree trunk. And, such mighty trees could be found everywhere in this place. It could be said that they had been growing since hundreds of years. However, there wasn't the slightest trace of human activity in this forest. It appeared to be a primitive forest. In addition, a plentiful quantity of various kinds of spirit herbs and other spirit materials could be seen here owing to the richness of spiritual energy in the atmosphere of this place. Shi Mu had already found 2 or 3 spiritual attribute grass and spirit materials by now, even though he had walked only for half an hour. This forest was also a dwelling place of all kinds of poisonous insects and strange beasts. In fact, they could be seen in a large number at this place. Shi Mu had been attacked 2 or 3 times by now. But, he had been able to finish them off with a slight movement of his hands and feet. However, it was hard to ensure that he would encounter an unworthy opponent the next time, just like the previous encounters. Therefore, Shi Mu was moving forward in a very attentive manner so that he could guard against the dangers that might pop up. Conversely, Cai had been bubbling with excitement all along, and had flown away without telling Shi Mu where he was going. Fortunately, they were connected through their minds. And, that thread of connection had allowed them to know of each other's safety. Shi Mu jumped over a withered tree that lay on the ground. And, his eyes suddenly congealed, and exposed a glimmer of exultation. He saw that there was a shaded place not far in front of him. In addition, there were 2 small blue-colored grasses at that place. These grasses were only 4 or 5 inches high, and their blue foliages were emitting bursts of blue halos. Blue meadow grasses. Shi Mu quickly walked over to the grasses. This blue meadow grass was considered to be a very rare and precious spirit grass. In fact, it played a very important role in refining several kinds of water attribute pills. It was extremely valuable. He carefully collected the 2 blue meadows grasses. But then, a squeal came from the front. Shi Tou, help! Cai screamed. Then, a whoosh sound was heard as he flew from the forest, and rushed toward Shi Mu with all his strength. Boom! Suddenly, the forest behind him got ripped apart by a gust of wind. Dwarf plants were either directly twisted to pieces or got uprooted. Simultaneously, several huge deep green-colored birds rushed over, issuing quack-quack sounds. And, their goal was none other than Cai. Shi Mu was alarmed for a moment. These vicious birds were 30 or 40 feet in size, and had a mouth full of beast-like sharp teeth. Moreover, their bodies were emanating bursts of evil energy. They were Xian-Tian-ranked demon beasts. Shi Mu didn't have the time to find out how Cai had managed to provoke these beasts. He quickly turned his hand, and drew out his sky-splitting bow and vulture-tailed arrows. The bow was emanating splendid green luminescence. It appeared as if it was embracing a bluish-green round moon when it was drawn to its full extent. Whiz! A black arrow light flashed at an unimaginably fast speed, as if a bolt of black lightning had streaked across the sky. The neck of one of the green birds got pierced by the black light the next moment. Fresh blood splashed, and its huge body started to glide heavily towards the ground. Its breathing had also stopped. However, the momentum of its body allowed it to rush a long distance forward until it knocked against a mighty plant, and finally stopped. Whoosh! A black arrow light flashed once again, and another bluish-green bird got stabbed. Then, that bird similarly collapsed to the ground. The remaining bluish-green birds issued frightening squeals, and flew towards higher altitudes when they witnessed these back-to-back violent deaths of two of their companions. They didn't dare to approach Shi Mu afterwards. Shi Mu gently stroked his bow, and the trace of a contented look glittered across his face. The might of the sky-splitting bow had ascended by a great margin after it had been refined and upgraded. In addition, its perfect coordination with the vulture-tailed arrow, which was also a high-ranked magic tool, had enabled it to reach an astonishing level. In fact, it was now formidable enough to threaten an Earth-ranked powerhouse. Its incredible strength had been revealed when Shi Mu had been in a tangle with the Earth-ranked Taoist priest of the Transcending Heaven Immortal cult before. Shi Mu looked at those bluish-green birds that were hovering in the air. He could have shot down 90% of them only with the support of his spirit eye if he wanted to, despite the fact that there was a considerable distance between them. The ominous birds in midair seemed to have sensed the murderous intention that had accumulated in Shi Mu's eyes. Therefore, they wailed a few times. Then, they turned around, and fled into the distance. They disappeared from sight within a matter of few seconds. These birds are very sharp in sensing their enemy's killing intention. Shi Mu put away the sky-splitting bow. Then, he walked over and collected the 2 arrows he had just shot. Shi Mu had already lost a few vulture-tailed arrows during the battle at the sea. And now, he had no means to replenish them. So, he wanted to use these few remaining precious arrows very judiciously. Quack, a narrow escape. I am safe since I have Shi Tou by my side. Cai landed on Shi Mu's shoulder. But, he was still badly shaken. Say, how did you manage to provoke these vicious birds? Shi Mu looked at Cai as he asked. I didn't do anything. It was just bad luck that I ran into these flat-haired beasts, and almost got eaten up by them. Cai shouted in rage. You're also a flat-haired beast? Shi Mu was speechless for a while. He then shook his head, and walked to the side of the corpses of the 2 bluish-green birds. He took a glance at the 2 birds in order to examine them a bit. Then, he took out his beast soul bag, and shot a streak of red light into it. The beast soul bag immediately issued a suction force. And, 2 masses of bluish-green beast souls flew out of the corpses, and rushed into the beast soul bag. Humph! I want to eat them. After all, I deserve it. Cai shouted. It seemed as if he was gloating over his success. Shi Mu cast a glance in the direction of those vicious birds that had just fled, and his brows slightly wrinkled. It appears that danger is lurking everywhere in the western continent. It seems that we may come across these demon beasts of Xian Tian ranked anywhere in this continent. So, you'd better not go too far from me from now on. Otherwise, you may have to face a demon beast's attack again. And, I may not be able to save you the next time that happens, he said. I got it, Cai nodded sincerely. Shi Mu turned his hands, and took out the western continent's map. However, he shook his head in dissatisfaction when he noticed that the map was too brief to understand. He hadn't come across any extremely special terrain so far. The only thing he knew was that he would have landed in the eastern part of this continent since he had somewhat followed the navigation route of the gigantic vast sea boat. But, he was unable to determine his exact location on the map at that moment. He put the map away, and continued to walk toward the west. He had no other choice but to keep advancing forward for now. However, there was a glimmer of hope in his heart that he might bump into some local people of this continent, or the people of the Eastern Dark Moon cult on the way. And, there was also a possibility that he would get hold of a much more detailed map of this continent, that would pave the way for him to reach the Rising to the Heaven Mountain. One day later, Shi Mu was still forging ahead in the woods. The area of this forest appeared to be astonishingly vast. His rough calculations had left him to conclude that he had already covered several hundred miles of distance so far. However, the vastness of this place made him feel as if he had covered a very short distance. He sat down under a big tree after a moment, and let out a sigh. Shi Mu hadn't encountered any real dangers so far along the way. But, the seemingly endless number of small-scale battles had left him to feel exhausted. Then, I'll look around in the vicinity for something to eat. Cai lay prone on Shi Mu's shoulder at the moment. But, he suddenly fired up with enthusiasm. He then flapped his wings, and flew away. Don't go too far away, Shi Mu said. Okay. Cai's silhouette soon disappeared into the woods. Shi Mu then shook his head, and sat down cross-legged. A flurried fluttering sound of wings burst forth after some time, and Shi Mu's eyes opened in response. Cai, you got into trouble once again. Shi Mu stood up. No, I haven't. Shi Tou, take a look at this thing. Cai swooped down speedily toward him. He had a fist-sized red fruit in his claws. That fruit bore a great similarity to a peach. But, it was sending forth a flame-like radiance. This is, Shi Mu's eyes opened a bit wider as he took the red fruit. The red fruit felt hot in his hand, as if he was holding a piece of charcoal. He sized it up a couple of times, and noticed that it was releasing a sweet aroma as well. This was sufficient to confirm that this fruit wasn't a poisonous substance. Moreover, Cai's eyesight had reached to an awe-inspiring extent these days. And he was blessed with an excellent ability to detect poison. So, he was unlikely to collect a poisonous fruit. This fruit gave off vibes that made Shi Mu feel drawn to it. Shi Mu hesitated a bit. But then, he opened his mouth, and took a bite. The red peach-like fruit melted into a fiery and sweet stream, and integrated into Shi Mu's body as it entered it. The real qi in his lower abdomen tumbled, and then it showed faint signs of growth. Shi Mu's eyes went wide open, and he ate the whole fruit in 2 or 3 bites. Consequently, the real qi in his body somewhat increased. It could be said that the wondrous effect of this fruit was almost equivalent to that of practicing in a place that had an abundance of fire attribute spirit for several days. Shi Mu's face sparkled with elation. Cai, are there more such fruits ahead? He asked. Yes, there are still some more, Cai replied. Well, take me there. Shi Mu forthwith said, and his eyes gleamed with excitement. Shi Mu soon arrived at a mountain valley under Cai's guidance. The temperature felt much higher at this place. Even the mountain rocks were pale red in color. A place with fire attribute spirit. Shi Mu's brows plunged into a frown. But then, he discovered that his conjecture was wrong. There was apparently a fire spirit mine in this valley. So, this valley had the ability to give birth to this kind of fire attribute spirit fruit. He had barely walked a few steps into the valley when he saw a strange deep red tree in front of him. The tree was red from top to bottom. Even its foliage was red. It seemed as if the whole tree had been set on fire. There were more than a dozen brilliant red fruits in the midst of its leaves. And, they were the same as the fruit that Cai had just brought to him. Shi Mu brimmed with ecstasy. He was about to approach the bright red tree when the ground suddenly burst open. A bluish-green vine drilled out of the ground, and coiled around his leg. Shi Mu was alarmed. He hastily pointed his foot below, and shot a few feet backwards. However, the crack in the ground grew wider, and a bluish-green human-shaped thing emerged out of it. It was 10 feet tall. What's this thing? Shi Mu was stupefied. This bluish-green thing had a head that was similar to that of human beings. And, it possessed various other characteristics of humans as well. It had human-like facial features and long and green curly hair on its head. However, its skin had a tree bark-like wrinkled texture. And, its hands and feet were made of a tree roots-like thing. A barbarian? No, I can sense the dark moon cult's aura on your body. The tree-like person opened its mouth, and issued a hoarse voice, which seemed like the sound produced by friction of iron sheets. You can speak. Shi Mu's face beamed with happiness since he had finally encountered a creature that could communicate on this continent. Who are you? Are you the companion of those people inside? The tree man asked. The people inside. Shi Mu's eyes brightened, and he looked towards Cai. I didn't go in. I don't know the situation inside. Cai shook his head. It doesn't matter who you are bound to die if you are planning to steal away the fire attribute peach fruits, the tree man bellowed. Then, it waved its hands, and the thick roots of the deep red tree radiated green radiance. Then, they darted toward Shi Mu. Hold on, let's not start a fight. I have some matters that I would like to ask you about. Shi Mu moved aside, and escaped the attack. Then, he said. However, the tree man didn't pay attention to his words. It waved its hands again, and a green shadow rushed forth toward Shi Mu from all directions, like sea waves. This tree man looked clumsy and stupid, but its strength was not inferior to that of the Xian-ranked demon beasts that Shi Mu had previously encountered in any respect. In fact, his offensive methods were rather special. In addition, it could also launch attacks from under the ground. Shi Mu would have been injured if not for the spirit sense that he had been using all along to keep watch on the surrounding area. Shi Mu moved sideways to evade a sharp green hardwood's thrust that had just drilled out of the ground. Afterwards, Shi Mu's face was clouded with a cold look. He waved his hand, and a golden light burst out. Then, it started to inflate until it turned into a 10 feet long sword. After that, it hacked towards the tree man. The tree man was taken aback. It waved its hands, and a thunderous sound spread from the ground. After that, several vines drilled out of the ground, and appeared before its body at a lightning speed. They intertwined to form a green rattan wall before the tree man's body in order to block the attack. However, the large golden sword was able to cleave the rattan wall without any difficulty. Then a light ka-cha sound was heard as the golden sword hacked at the tree man's shoulder. It then cleaved the tree man's body into 2 halves with ease. In fact, it had seemed as if it had cut a withered branch from a tree. The tall tree man issued a loud scream filled with agony. A green fluid welled up from his wound. He made a few futile twitches for some time before he drew his last breath. Shi Tou, what is this thing? Cai flew over, and threw an inquisitive look at the tree man corpse on the ground. It appears to be a special kind of evil beast. I think it's probably a tree demon. Shi Mu waved his hand to recall his golden sword. Chapter 303, Meddling in Other People's Business. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu's brows abruptly creased, and he waved his hand. The golden sword chi flashed, and hacked the tree demon's head. It split its head into 2 halves. Cai stared at Shi Mu in astonishment. It couldn't be said with certainty that this unknown species didn't possess any special resurrection ability. So, it was better to destroy it completely in order to guard against contingencies, Shi Mu explained. Cai heard Shi Mu's words, and stared at him in blank dismay. He then nodded repeatedly. Shi Mu didn't say anything afterwards. He turned around, and climbed up that tree. He then plucked all the peaches from the tree in a very quick and effortless manner. Then, he received them in his vast earth ring. His gaze turned towards the depths of the valley after completing this task. Go in, and take a look at the surroundings. I think there should be other people inside. The tree demon had said so, Shi Mu said. Cai nodded. He flapped his wings, and flew straight ahead. Shi Mu also walked forward in a careful manner. He tried not to make any noise while doing so. The expression in his eyes looked unusually bright at this moment. The tree demon had mentioned the Dark Moon cult. But, that hadn't surprised Shi Mu. Shi Mu had spent the last few months with Luan on the ship. So, he had heard a few things pertaining to the Western Dark Moon cult. However, the tree demon had also mentioned the barbarian race, which came as a bit of a surprise to him. Could it be possible that the barbarian race was present in the Western continent as well? Shi Mu noticed that his field of vision had gradually widened after he had covered some distance. A fierce fighting sound indistinctly reached his ears at this time. His eyes flashed, and he became even more cautious while proceeding forward. He soon arrived at a considerably expansive and vacant land in the mountains. A large number of fire-like fruit trees could be seen here. These trees were similar to the one he had seen outside the valley. However, most of these trees hadn't borne any fruits. He moved a little further, and hid behind a tree to see the situation of the battle in front. There was a vacant land in the woods, and two groups of people were engaged in a fight there. One group was composed of only 3 people. They wore strange-looking green robes. In addition, all of them had sky-blue eyes. There were 2 middle-aged men and 1 20-year-old young girl in this group. The girl's facial features were very delicate and pretty. Her legs were so smooth and slender that they could dazzle anyone. These 3 people's cultivation had reached the Xiantian realm. They waved their swords, and blade lights and sword chi burst out of them. The opposite party was a group of 5 grey-robed people. A grey radiance was shimmering on these people's bodies. These people had summoned a few dead spirit creatures for assistance. And, all of them were incessantly fighting with the 3 people on the opposite side. Shi Mu's eyes flashed. The 3 green-robed people didn't appear to be ordinary humans. In fact, the aura that they were exuding was very similar to that of the barbarians. They should be the barbarians that the tree demon had mentioned. Moreover, the robes of the 5 grey-robed people on the opposite side bore a great similarity to the clothing of Luan and other palace lords. The only difference between their clothing was in terms of details. They are the Western Dark Moon cult's people. Shi Mu said inwardly. Shi Mu was pleased to find out that familiar races resided in this continent. Otherwise, he would have found it rather difficult to adapt to his new environment. The people of the Western Dark Moon cult outnumbered the opposite party by 5 to 3. And, their strength couldn't be considered inferior to that of the members of the opposite party. Besides, they had also summoned demon beast-like human skeletons and zombies in huge numbers to assist them. Those creatures gradually encircled the 3 barbarians. Therefore, the situation of the 3 barbarians had worsened. Your Dark Moon cult mustn't go too far. This place comes under the territory of our giant tree tribe. But, you people always linger here with the intention of stealing away our fire attribute peach fruits. And today, you have flagrantly showed up here to capture our fruits. I'll certainly report this matter to the chief of our tribe. And, you will beg him for mercy when that time comes. A grey-haired middle-aged man was making moves to ward off the dead spirit creatures around him. Simultaneously, he said in a stern voice. He, you need to save this life of yours if you want to go back and report this matter. A lanky young man of the Dark Moon cult remarked with a fiendish grin. The facial expressions of the 3 barbarians changed as soon as this statement was made. Your Dark Moon cult and all the barbarian tribes of the eastern region had signed a treaty back then. According to that treaty, we must act together to deal with the demon race. But, you dare to kill people of our giant tree tribe. Don't you fear that the treaty between the barbarian race and the Dark Moon cult would fall apart if this matter gets leaked? The green-robed girl shouted in her delicate voice. Who would ever know that this was our doing if we do everything cleanly? The lanky man's facial expression stiffened at first. But then, he waved his hand and said with a sneer. Then, the surface of the ground emanated magnificent grey light, and 2 lofty carrion wolves emerged before them. Both were Xiantian-ranked dead spirit creatures. They then pounced toward the 3 people. The carrion wolf's skin was coarse and thick in texture. so, they weren't afraid of swords. The three barbarians felt an increase in pressure as soon as these carrion wolves joined forces with the opposite party. The green-robed barbarian girl's cultivation was the weakest among the three barbarians. She was only at the primary stage of the Xian-Tian realm. Suddenly, one of the carrion wolves pounced toward her, and threw its hand to grab her. The girl shouted loudly in her delicate voice. She held a green dagger in each of her hands. She streaked her daggers across the air, and dagger shadows darted out to resist the wolf. Clang! A crisp sound rang out. The green-robed girl's complexion had turned deathly white. She had succeeded in warding off the attack of the carrion wolf with her daggers. However, a few large wounds had been inflicted on her snow-white arm. And, fresh blood was gushing out of those wounds. Young lady! The two middle-aged men were shocked as they saw this scene. The two barbarian men looked at each other. They then made a low-pitched howling sound. A green halo emerged on the bodies of the barbarian men. Then, their bodies inflated to a great extent in an instant. Their skin turned green, and its texture became wrinkled like a tree bark. Shi Mu was far from this battlefield. But, a hint of astonishment appeared on his face as he witnessed this scene. They used totem to transform their bodies. That seems like a plant's spirit, right? Shi Mu wasn't unfamiliar with the body transformation technique that these two middle-aged men had just used. But, he was rather curious to know about the beast spirits that these two men had sealed within their bodies. The spiritual aura around these two barbarian men had been enhanced by a lot after they had transformed. In addition, they looked very much similar to a tree demon at the moment. The two barbarian men's faces got suffused with a frantic look, and they rushed straight toward the dead spirit creatures. These two barbarians had completely resorted to offensive methods. They had completely ignored the thought of guarding themselves even though those dead spirit creatures were brandishing their weapons to chop them. A series of muffled sounds were heard. Those dead spirit creatures had hacked their bone weapons at the two barbarian men's bodies. But, their weapons could cause only a few shallow bruises on them. The weapons in the two barbarians' hands emitted an exceptionally bright green radiance. And then, they hacked and killed several evil human skeletons in a row. Their weapon possessed incredible vehemence. The grey-haired middle-aged barbarian turned his hand, and took out a green animal skin magic charm. He then flung it toward the ground. A ray of green light flashed on the green magic charm, and the magic charm integrated into the ground. Then, the ground shook, and a sharp splinter drilled out of the ground. The Dark Moon cult's disciples who stood in encirclement ring were alarmed when they saw the sharp splinter. They abruptly flurried backwards in response. However, their flurried movement tore open an opening in the encirclement ring. Young lady, run fast! The grey-haired middle-aged barbarian was delighted to see the opening. He brandished his blade, and it issued a green blade light which then elongated to a few feet. Then, that blade light quivered, and drew back straight towards the carrion wolves and dead spirit creatures. Simultaneously, that grey-haired barbarian turned his head, and shouted to tell the girl to flee. The green-robed girl's face exposed a hesitant look at first. But then, she turned around, and disappeared in an instant. It had seemed as if she had changed into a green shadow when she had rushed out of the opening in the encirclement ring in order to gallop into the distance. Shi Mu's complexion somewhat changed as he noticed that the girl was running in his direction. You want to run away? The lanky disciple's facial expression changed, and he shouted aloud. Then, he also broke into a run in pursuit of her. He waved his hand, and a grey light flashed before his body. Then, a pitch-black bone spear flashed out of it, and thrust toward the green-robed girl's body. The girl held her sword behind her back like a lightning bolt, and streaked a fan-shaped green shadow. This fan-shaped shadow then hacked at the tip of the bone spear. A clang sound was heard, and the bone spear was struck and sent flying. However, the girl's complexion turned pale. She tried to run away, but her body suddenly became weak, and she collapsed to the ground. She didn't know when a black bone needle had stabbed her calf. Moreover, a wisp of black chi was seeping into her body through the bone needle. Ha ha! How do my dual flying needles feel? The lanky youth burst into a laughter which was smeared with a sense of complacency. Then, he walked over to that girl in a nonchalant manner. The two middle-aged barbarians were shocked to see this scene. They were far from the girl at this moment. They tried to rush over to help her with all their might. But, they were prevented from doing so by the dead spirit creatures and the other Dark Moon cult disciples. A trace of stubbornness peeped through the green-robed girl's face. She took the support of the tree trunk beside her in an attempt to struggle herself into a standing position. There's no use in making a senseless revolt. You should allow yourself to be seized obediently, and not put up a pointless fight. The lanky man made a sarcastic tongue-clicking sound. The green-robed girl exerted her full strength to stand up. However, she collapsed to the ground as her body had become very weak. The cartilage of my yin needle had been smeared with a sinister poison. It has been made specifically to deal with your barbarian race. You will soon find yourself unable to budge. The lanky young man stood in front of the girl. His eyes suddenly revealed a strange look. And then, it seemed as if a mass of fire had emerged in the depths of his eyes. What do you want to do? The young girl's eyes finally revealed a frightened look. Tisk tisk, you are indeed a beautiful and delicate girl. It would be too regrettable to kill you. The lanky man looked her up and down, and a sinister look flashed through his eyes. He then stretched his hand, and touched the girl's soft and smooth face. The girl screamed. She used her arms to take support from the ground, and moved her body backwards. She had done so in order to stay away from this sinister man. After that, she slipped her left hand under her clothes at such a tricky angle that no one could see that. Then, she fumbled around her waist. The smile on the lanky man's face broadened even more. He was apparently enjoying this kind of malicious thrill. But then, a streak of green light burst out of the green-robed girl's body, and darted towards the lanky man. Then, it exploded with a loud rumbling sound. The lanky man's complexion profoundly changed, and he flipped backwards in order to evade the attack. However, he couldn't remain unaffected by the explosion since it had occurred at a very short distance from him. Consequently, half of his clothes were torn to shreds, and a few wounds had burst open on his body. **ch. The lanky man blazed with fury, and a bone-white sword emerged in his hand with a flash of white light. Then, a sky-soaring white light emerged on top of the sword, and condensed into a mighty blade light. Then, he hacked his blade toward the green-robed girl. The two middle-aged barbarians thundered furiously as they saw this scene. But, they were unable to make a move as they were far away. Bang! Layers of smoke and dust ascended skyward from the ground. However, the lanky young man's complexion turned gloomy when the dust and smoke settled. He saw that a deep blade trace had been split open in the ground in front of him, but there was no trace of that green-robed girl. He then looked straight ahead, and saw a tall and sturdy black-robed young man stood a few feet away from him. The green-robed girl was right beside this man. It was Shi-Mu. The two middle-aged barbarians and the Dark Moon cult's disciples were left stunned. And, their hand-to-hand fight became a bit slower as a result. Even the green-robed girl was dumbfounded to see Shi-Mu beside her. Your Excellency, may I know who you are? You have the courage to meddle in the Dark Moon cult's affairs. Could it be possible that you are tired of living? But, let me tell you one thing, your body looks strong and sturdy. I have gained expertise in bronze corpses. So, it seems that you are worthy of use. The lanky young man ran his observant gaze over the black-robed man. Then, he said in a tone that revealed his malicious intentions. But, Shi-Mu didn't utter a single word. He simply cast a glance at the lanky man, and let out a cold snort. You're courting death. A cold gleam flashed across the lanky man's eyes. Then, he lifted up his bone-white blade, and a layer of white light bubbled up on its surface. Shi-Mu flicked his finger at the same time, and a golden light burst forth from his body. It flashed and appeared in front of the lanky man the next moment. Then, it hacked straight toward his head. A spirit tool! The lanky was thunderstruck. However, he quickly moved his bone-white blade to block the sword. Simultaneously, he shot backwards to evade the attack. Whiz! But then, a streak of white light darted from the golden sword light, as if a poisonous snake had flicked its tongue out. The white light rushed straight ahead, and wound around the lanky man's body with a flash of light. This streak of white light was actually the white chi chain. The lanky man was taken aback. His movement became very slow as he was bound by the white chi chain. The golden sword again emanated a bright light. Then, it hacked directly at his head, and submerged into his body. A loud scream spread from the golden light. The golden light drew back the next moment, and turned into a small golden sword. Then, it flew back to Shi Mu's hand with a whoosh sound. The lanky man's head had been separated from his body. His head had rolled down to the ground, but a petrified look could still be seen in his eyes. The other 4 disciples of the Dark Moon cult couldn't have imagined that their leader would be killed on the spot, that too in a fleeting second. They gazed at Shi Mu with an appalled look on their faces. Then, the 4 exchanged meaningful glances, and burst into a run at the same time. Shi Mu's complexion looked cold at the moment. He flicked his finger, and the golden sword flashed out once again. Then, it dashed toward the 4 men as if it were a meteor, and quickly caught up with them. The golden sword then released an extensive mass of light. That light flashed, and changed into 4 identical golden sword shadows. Then, they hacked towards the 4 people to chop them down. Chapter 304, Giant Tree Tribe. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Ah! Ah! 2 spine-chilling screams burst forth. The 2 relatively weaker disciples of the Dark Moon cult were struck by the sword shadows, and fell into a pool of blood. The other 2 disciples were relatively stronger. So, they promptly stimulated their magic tools and magic charms, and resisted the attacks. And, they only sustained a few injuries as a result. So, they again broke into a run, and galloped far into the distance. Whiz whiz! But then, 2 black arrow lights flashed past, and rendered the 2 men's escape impossible. The vulture-tailed arrows pierced through their bodies, and nailed them to the ground. They struggled for a moment. Then, their breathing stopped. The 3 barbarians looked at Shi Mu with a petrified look on their faces. Shi Mu hadn't budged from his place this entire time. But, he had still managed to kill all 5 people of the Dark Moon cult in a fraction of a second even though they weren't weaklings. In fact, he hadn't exerted even a little strength. It seemed as if he had merely put his hand behind his back. Moreover, the cold and indifferent expression on Shi Mu's face left them with a sense of unfathomable mystery. "Thank you so much for your timely help, Your Excellency. We will always remain grateful to you." The 2 middle-aged barbarians retracted their totems, and returned to their original appearances. Then, they touched their chest, and expressed gratitude to Shi Mu in a respectful manner. "You don't have to be so polite. It was just a trivial matter," Shi Mu replied. The green-robed girl was struggling to stand up on the other side. But, it was impossible for her to budge at the moment since she had been hit by the poisonous needle of the lanky man a moment ago. "How are you, young lady?" The 2 middle-aged barbarians were alarmed to see her condition. They quickly rushed over to her. Shi Mu cast a glance at that green-robed girl. Then, he released his spirit sense, and swept over the body of the lanky young man. His eyes rested on the lanky man's left hand. There was a grey ring on one of his fingers. Shi Mu took the grey ring off his finger, and instilled a wisp of his spirit sense into it. He explored it for a moment. Then, he waved his hand, and took out a white jade bottle. He then pulled open the bottle's cork, and sniffed it. He nodded to himself after that, and walked forward. He gave the bottle to the girl and said, "This thing should be the antidote. So, you take it." "Thank you, Mr. The girl thanked him in a soft voice. Then, she picked up the jade bottle with her weak and powerless hand. She poured out a pill, and swallowed it. Meanwhile, Shi Mu went over to the corpses of the other 4 disciples of the Dark Moon cult, and collected all of their belongings. Simultaneously, he retrieved the 2 vulture-tailed arrows that he had just shot. Shi Mu was surprised to notice that all 5 disciples of the Dark Moon cult had a storage ring. However, the space inside those storage rings wasn't very large, it was only around 10 feet. But, it was still crowded with spirit stones. In fact, each person's storage ring contained nearly 20 or 30,000 spirit stones. In addition, there were also some spirit grasses and ores in their rings. The Western continent is indeed blessed with a bountiful amount of valuable resources. Shi Mu inwardly exclaimed in surprise. But, he was disappointed to find that there wasn't a single map in the 5 people's storage rings. He wanted the map more than any other thing at this time. The green-robed girl finally stood up. It seemed that the poison in her body had almost been dispelled by the pill. Many thanks for rescuing us, Mr. Otherwise, we 3 people might have ended up in a very miserable situation. The girl performed a ritual to convey her gratitude to Shi Mu. Don't mention it, Shi Mu replied in a casual manner, but his eyes were sweeping over the surrounding area. There were plenty of red fruit trees in the vicinity, and all of them were laden with many red fruits just like he had previously seen. Those fruits were emanating captivating rays of light. Does Mr. want to pick some fire attribute peach fruits? The girl saw Shi Mu's expression. Her beautiful eyes flashed as she asked. This fruit is very beneficial for my practice. But, I had heard what you people had said to the Dark Moon cult's people. These fruit trees belong to your family, don't they? Shi Mu said. It doesn't matter since Mr. has saved our lives. You can pick as many as you please. These fire attribute peach fruits are a kind of yang attribute spirit fruit. They are indeed a top-class supplement for those who practice yang attribute cultivation arts. In fact, it has the ability to increase the real qi in one's body by a substantial margin, the girl explained. The 2 middle-aged barbarian men stood behind her at the moment. Their complexion changed when they heard these words. They were about to speak something when the green-robed girl raised her hand to stop them. I see. Thank you so much for this. Shi Mu smiled, and then quickly ran up to a fruit tree. Then, he started to collect the peach fruits. He plucked off 40 or 50 fruits in a row. In fact, the trees in a small nearby area were completely stripped off their fruits in a matter of moments before he finally stopped. The 2 middle-aged barbarians' faces revealed a depressed look when they saw the bare branches of the fruit trees. But, the young girl still had a smile on her face. Are they enough? The girl asked. I have collected plenty of them. They should be enough for me for some time, Shi Mu replied with a smile. The green-robed girl looked at Shi Mu, and her cheeks got smeared with a rosy glow. It appeared as if she wanted to speak something, but she couldn't. May I venture to ask your respected name, Mr.? We are the tribal people of the nearby giant tree tribe. The grey-haired middle-aged barbarian had noticed the green-robed girl's facial expression. So, he stepped forward, and asked. I am Mu Shi, and I belong to the fierce snake tribe. I was just passing by, that's all. Shi Mu slightly separated his clothes from his chest, and showed a corner of his chest totem while he was speaking. Fierce snake tribe. The 2 middle-aged barbarians were alarmed by this. They then exchanged a glance. Shi Mu noticed the changed expression in the 2 men's eyes, and a thought tumbled in his mind. So you are Mr. Mu. This young girl is Lu Tang. I am the daughter of the giant tree tribe's chief, the green-robed girl said without revealing any strange looks on her face. Young lady Lu Tang. I'm sorry for being disrespectful to you. Shi Mu cupped his hands in obeisance, and said. Mr. Mu, you might as well come and sit for a moment with our small tribe if you are not in a hurry to continue with your journey. Allow this young girl to perform the duties of a good host, the green-robed girl looked bashful while inviting him. Young lady, the fierce snake tribe belongs to the vicious barbarians group. But, you are inviting this man to our tribe. I'm afraid, the grey-haired middle-aged barbarian's complexion changed, and he said in a soft voice. It doesn't matter. I will explain this to my father and the elders, the green-robed girl said. The two people were discussing while keeping their voices low. But, Shi Mu was still able to listen to their conversation clearly. I would rather accept this invitation reverently instead of declining it courteously, since young lady Lu Tang has herself invited me, an idea crossed Shi Mu's mind as he replied. After all, this was a fortuitous opportunity for him to inquire about this continent. So, he was unlikely to let this chance slip by so easily. Mr. Mu, please. The girl's eyes got smeared with a hint of happiness. She immediately took the lead, and walked in the direction of the valley. Shi Mu stepped forward, and followed her closely. The group of pedestrians soon arrived outside a valley where they saw the corpse of the tree man. The green-robed girl and the two barbarians looked shocked when their eyes fell on the corpse. Radish shuttle tree demon. Lu Tang threw a look at Shi Mu, and asked, Mr. Mu, have you slain this radish shuttle tree demon? Yes. Shi Mu didn't deny it. The girl nodded slowly. Simultaneously, her elegant eyebrows creased, and she exchanged glances with the other two barbarian men. What's the matter? Could killing this tree demon trigger some kind of trouble? Shi Mu asked. It's not like that. The fact is that these radish shuttle tree demons have always lived in the eastern mountain range. I hadn't expected that one of them would show up here. It's a bit strange, that's all, the green-robed girl replied. Shi Mu's eyes flashed. He wanted to know more about this radish shuttle tree demon. But, it wasn't the appropriate time to ask about this matter. The four people continued to walk forward. Half an hour passed like this. Then, the group of people arrived in front of a village that was built by the hillside. Most of the buildings in this village were wooden. But, they didn't give off the slightest sense of oldness or shabbiness. They rather had a special implicit charm about them. There was a mighty ancient tree in the middle of the village. It was considerably large in size. In fact, it was simply beyond comparison. Moreover, it was faintly emitting splendid green radiance. In addition, there was a wooden wall which surrounded the whole village from outside. Some people were on top of that wall, and were taking rounds to keep watch over the surroundings. This tribe didn't appear too big from the outside. It seemed that there should be at most 1,000 people in this tribe. These four people had barely arrived at the tribe's entrance when they bumped into several people head-on. The leader of this group was a tall and dignified-looking middle-aged man. He wore a solemn expression on his face. Shi Mu's brows twitched into a frown as he sensed the overwhelming spiritual aura of this middle-aged barbarian. He was at the primary stage of the earth rank. Moreover, the people beside him possessed the strength of a Xian-Tian-ranked warrior. He sighed inwardly when he saw the condition of the giant tree tribe. However, this tribe had an earth-ranked powerhouse even though it was very small. So, it seemed that the rich spiritual energy of the Western continent had played a substantial role in their martial arts practice. The dignified-looking middle-aged man's face revealed a surprised look as he saw the four people. His gaze immediately turned to see the stranger Shi Mu. Shi Mu felt a slight chill in his heart. But, he didn't panic just yet. The dignified-looking middle-aged man's eyes again revealed a surprised look. Father and elders, the green-robed girl saw the dignified-looking middle-aged barbarian there, and trod forward to welcome him. Chief, the two middle-aged barbarians beside her also greeted him with deep veneration. I had sent you to patrol the territory. Why have you returned so late? The dignified middle-aged man looked at the green-robed girl, and the dignified look on his face softened a bit. Then, he asked in a slightly reproachful tone. Father, we had bumped into the Dark Moon cult's people when we were patrolling the territory. And then, we were attacked, and almost killed by them, the green-robed girl gave a brief recount to her father. Scoundrels! The Dark Moon cult's people have indeed become rampant and unrestrained. The dignified middle-aged barbarian was infuriated after he had heard the entire story. A few people beside him also looked enraged. Your daughter wouldn't have escaped today if not for Mr. Mew. Mr. Mew of the fierce snake tribe rescued us, and also killed those 5 disciples. The green-robed girl pointed her finger at Shi Mew. The expression in the dignified middle-aged barbarian's eyes became gentle when he heard that Shi Mew had rescued his daughter as well as the other 2 tribesmen. But his facial expression darkened the moment he heard these 3 words: fierce snake tribe. The people beside him started to gaze at Shi Mew, and became somewhat vigilant. I am Mew Shi. I am honored to meet the chief of the giant tree tribe, Shi Mew said while cupping his hands in a reverent manner. Mr. Mew, please accept my heartfelt thanks for saving my daughter and tribesmen. The dignified middle-aged man was expressing his gratitude, but there wasn't the slightest trace of a smile on his face. Instead, a trace of fear and vigilance had peeped through his dignified face. We belong to the same race at the end of the day. Besides, it was just a trivial matter, Shi Mew said. The fierce snake tribe is one of the influential tribes of the vicious barbarian race. I wonder what Mr. Mew is doing in our remote little place, the dignified middle-aged man asked. I had embarked on a journey for pleasure and experience. But I lost my way, and ended up here, Shi Mew replied. Oh, you were on a journey before you landed here. The dignified middle-aged man's eyes revealed the gleam of a delighted look as he heard Shi Mew's reply. But his facial expression couldn't mask the trace of distrust he still harbored. He paused for a moment. Then, he continued, I appreciate that Mr. Mew has saved my daughter along with the other 2 people of my tribe. However, my giant tree tribe belongs to the peaceful barbarians group. So, it's not appropriate to invite your excellency to our tribe as a noble guest since you are associated with the vicious barbarians. I would request your excellency to understand my situation. Shi Mew's facial expression looked slightly moved, and he let out a light sigh in his heart. The fact was that he wanted to seize this opportunity to scout out some necessary information about the Western continent. But it seemed that this wasn't the right time to do so. Then, I will take my leave in light of this, Shi Mew nodded to the green-robed girl. Then, he turned around and walked away. Father, Mr. Mew has saved my life. Don't tell me this is the way our giant tree tribe treats a savior. The green-robed girl's face exposed an anxious look when she saw Shi Mew walking away. Hence, she said. This is our tribe's rule. You aren't allowed to question it. You are fully aware of the fact that this man belongs to the vicious barbarian tribe. Even so, you have invited him to our family. This matter has violated my giant tree tribe's commandment. So, you must be punished. Your punishment is to go to the ancestral shrine and kneel for 1 whole night there. It's a disciplinary action to teach you a lesson, the dignified middle-aged man snorted, and walked in the direction of his tribe while flicking his sleeve. The girl's face revealed an indignant look. She turned her head, and looked in Shi Mew's direction. However, he had already disappeared by then. Chapter 305, A Chance Encounter in the Waterfall. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mew had felt somewhat dejected when he had left the giant tree tribe. In fact, anyone would have felt the same way if they had been in Shi Mew's place. His pace continued to become faster as he walked farther away. Consequently, he had moved a few miles away from the tribe in a very short span of time. Finally, he stopped on a small mountain. The seed of gloominess that had sprouted in his heart had almost vanished by the time he arrived here. After all, Shi Mew had always been a man of calm mind and unaffected disposition. The rejection that he had faced in this instance was nothing but an insignificant matter for him. Besides, he had never planned to obtain any rewards from them. However, he had recently landed in a strange place. And, he had finally found a person who could have provided him some necessary information. But, he hadn't expected that the opposite party could be this intolerant towards an outsider. The tribe chief hadn't even asked the questions that were jiggling in his heart. But, Shi Mu could still try to find other people here since this continent was the dwelling place of many barbarian tribes. A black shadow flew over, and landed on Shi Mu's shoulder at this time. It was Cai. Haha, Shi Tou is depressed since he was driven away by those people, Cai said with a smile. He seemed to be rejoicing in Shi Mu's misfortune. You're so talkative, Shi Mu flicked his finger, and a gust of wind pounded on Cai's body. Ouch! Cai exclaimed. The gust of wind staggered his body, and nearly made him fall off Shi Mu's shoulder. But, the other ridiculing words that were about to flow out of Cai's mouth slammed back into his stomach as a result. Shi Mu turned his head, and glanced in the direction of the giant tree tribe. Then, he let out a soft sigh. Young Lady Lu Tang was in the middle, while those two middle-aged barbarians were on either side of her when he was on the way to their tribe along with them. Therefore, he hadn't gotten a chance to ask her about the way out of this hilly forest area. However, things had already gotten to this point, and Shi Mu had no other means to meet his goal. So, he was left with no other choice but to stick to his former method, and continue to advance in the western direction with his full strength. Let's go, Shi Mu said. Then, he turned around, and walked into the distance. The sky had almost approached darkness at this moment. So, it wouldn't be long before the curtain of the night would finally fall. Shi Mu's plan was to get to the summit of 1,000 or more feet high mountain peak before the sky got shrouded in darkness. There was a sky-soaring mountain peak not far from him. A huge waterfall cascaded down this mountain peak. It was several hundred feet wide. It was flowing down at a very fast speed. Simultaneously, it was splashing water in all directions. Hwa hwa, the gurgling sound of water was reverberating through the ravine. A dozen or more protrusions were scattered along the descent of the waterfall. Black megaliths of different sizes divided the dripping water curtain into myriads of chains of glistening silver torrents. In addition, gusts of wind were constantly howling through the remote valley of the mountain peak. And, a mass of mist was also floating in this wind. It looked from afar as if a dense layer of mist had pervaded the air. The waterfall carried a magnificent and imposing aura. Shi Mu had never seen such a boundless waterfall in the eastern continent. So, he couldn't help but gaze at the waterfall for some time. After that, he found a dry place, and sized up the surrounding area for a while. He cast a simple barrier spell in the vicinity once he saw that there was nothing unusual around. And then, he sat down with his legs crossed. The darkness of the night gradually grew strong. A round bright moon had also slowly ascended to the sky. Shi Mu closed his eyes, and exhibited the posture of the moon-swallowing art. He then entered his dreamland in a matter of moments. A vast mountain forest was towering aloft from the ground. There were numerous ancient trees on it. In fact, they seemed like numerous green umbrellas. The entire mountain forest was permeated with white mist. And, this mist was surprisingly permeated with rich heavenly spiritual energy, so much so that all kinds of heavenly materials, treasures, spirit grass, and spirit flowers could be seen everywhere as far as the eye could see. But, these exceedingly precious spiritual attribute flowers and plants were like weeds at this place since no one seemed to have shown any interest in them. These ancient trees, clouds, and mist, luxuriant flowers, and other precious things constituted an aesthetic landscape to behold. Unfortunately, there was no one to appreciate their beauty. An ape was climbing up the trunk of an old tree at this moment. Its whole body was snow-white in color. It continued to move forward in a persistent manner. The white ape was only 1 foot in height. So, it seemed to be very young. However, its golden eyes made it appear smart and quick-witted. It was repeatedly looking around. And, he was also plucking off fresh fruits to eat along the way. The little white ape walked out of the woods after some time. Suddenly, a loud water splashing sound burst forth, and attracted the ape's attention. The ape's eyes drew towards a massive waterfall nearby. This 1,000 feet wide waterfall was pouring down in torrents. In addition, a layer of mist had spread across the entire cliff. It constituted the magnificent ambience of a wonderland. The water of this waterfall was faint blue in color. It wasn't ordinary water, it was suffused with heavenly and spiritual energy. The little white ape's face brightened with a blissful expression as its eyes fell on this waterfall. It sprang up, and plunged into the pool under the waterfall. Then, it started to gulp mouthfuls of water. After that, it started to play in the water. It even splashed the water for some time. The white ape had been in the pool for a while. Therefore, the hair on its body had started to appear even more pure and refined. Also, the ape had started to give off splendid white radiance. The little white ape was deeply absorbed in its amusement. It was kidding around excitedly when a streak of white light suddenly descended from the sky and landed near the pool. Some pure white flowers were fluttering and whirling in that white light. The white radiance gradually receded, and revealed the silhouette of a woman. She was clad in royal clothes. This woman's skin was as fair as a white jade. Her slender jade-like neck and exceptionally beautiful facial features could entrance any person. In fact, her peerless beauty could leave a person incapable of looking straight at her. She was clad in a long white royal dress. Her luxuriant black hair hung down her back in a graceful manner. Her elegant figure exuded a kind of inviolable unworldly feeling, as if she was a goddess from the ninth heaven. But, there seemed to be a hint of anxiousness on the woman's face since her smoke-black eyebrows were slightly knitted at the moment. Even so, she looked bright and stunning. Such beauty couldn't be seen everywhere. The woman swept her gaze around, and her eyes drew toward the enormous waterfall and the surrounding beautiful scenery. Her beautiful eyes brightened up, and her knitted eyebrows loosened a bit. The young white ape stood in the pool. It was gazing at the royally dressed lady in amazement. Apparently, the woman's unparalleled appearance had shaken up the little white ape's mind. A gust of mountain wind swept over, and blew a wisp of the waterfall at this moment. The blown water happened to fall on the little ape's head, and shook him out of its trance. So, it brandished its hands and feet in a confused manner, and exuded a few squeaking sounds. The woman in the white royal robe heard these sounds, and turned her head to look in the direction of the ape. She saw the little white ape's stupid appearance, and her beautiful eyes couldn't help but light up in response. She waved her hand, and the white ape's body was suddenly held up by an invisible force. Then, the white ape flew out of the pool, and found itself suspended in front of the royally dressed woman. Zi, the white ape was clearly very clever. Its big, black, and sparkling eyes were gazing at the woman in front of it. It was neither afraid of her, nor hiding from her. The woman looked at the cute and adorable little monkey, and the corners of her mouth curved into a faint arc. This exceptional beauty looked like 1,000 flowers in full bloom as this smile glittered across her face. In fact, her one smile seemed as if it could melt the ice and fill brightness to everything around her. The woman's lily-white hand gently rubbed the white ape's hairy head. Then, she turned her hand, and a red fruit appeared in her hand out of nowhere. She then held it before the white ape's body. The little white ape stretched out its hands, and received it. Then, it opened its mouth, and took a bite of it. An expression of pleasant surprise bloomed on its tiny face the next moment. It then swallowed down the whole fruit in 2 or 3 bites. After that, it gave a loud and satisfied belch since it had devoured the whole fruit very quickly. The royally dressed woman covered her mouth, and burst into a giggle upon seeing the funny appearance of the little ape. However, the little white ape smacked its lips a couple of times. It seemed as if it wasn't completely satisfied. It raised its head, and gazed at the woman in a somewhat impatient manner. The royally dressed woman smiled at him. Then, she took out another red fruit, and passed it to the white ape. She then waved her hand, and made the ape descend to the ground in a gentle manner. After that, she let out a soft sigh, and started to wander around the pool. The little white ape again gobbled up the red fruit in no time. and the hair on its body exuded even brighter silver radiance as a result. Then, the ape started to hop beside the royally dressed woman's body. It seemed as if it didn't want to part with her so soon. The woman wandered around for a while, and then stopped. A layer of white radiance gleamed on her body, and she flew upward in the air. "Zi, zi!" the little ape shouted. Simultaneously, it stretched out its hand, and grabbed the corner of the royally dressed woman's fluttering skirt. The royally dressed woman was surprised by this. She turned back to look at the ape. She looked into the little white ape's eyes. She saw that those eyes were brimming with hope and expectation. She smiled gently, and waved her hand. An invisible force propped up the ape once again, and she held it in her bosom. The white ape's face gleamed with a delighted look. And it issued a few squeaking screams. Then, it began to act like a spoiled brat before the royally dressed woman. The woman hesitated for a moment. Then, her red lips gently opened, and she said 2 words to the ape. She had apparently given a name to the little ape. The little ape heard the words, and started to dance. It stamped its feet with happiness as if it had gained the most precious treasure. Simultaneously, it nodded again and again. The royal dressed woman waved her sleeves, and a white light lifted her body. Then, she soared into the sky, and became a streak of white light. Shi Mu's body trembled, and he woke up from his dream. A group of stars was floating behind his head. 3 of these stars were sparkling brightly, while one looked dim at the moment. It seemed as if that one star would take a long time to brighten up like the others had. The sky had regained its brightness by now. The bright red sun could be seen in the east. This was the appropriate time to begin the practice of the sun-swallowing art. However, Shi Mu didn't seem to have any such intention at the moment. He simply gazed at the enormous waterfall nearby with his dazed eyes. The situation in the dream was still vivid in his mind. That goddess-like outstanding beauty had made her graceful appearance only in his dream, but she had still managed to engrave a profound impression in Shi Mu's heart. She was like a dreamlike woman to him. Her heavenly beauty was beyond comparison. In fact, she had far surpassed all the women that he had met so far. Ximen Shuet, Zhongxiu, and Jin Xiaochai were exceptional beauties of this human world. But, the 3 women were still a little inferior to that woman in his dream. And, this stood true in terms of appearance as well as temperament. Shi Mu couldn't shake off a kind of indescribable familiar feeling which the royally dressed woman had left in his heart. In fact, he felt as if he had met her somewhere before. He made the greatest possible effort to recall that, but he ended up empty-handed. He was certain that he would have had an impression of this heavenly beauty in his mind if he had seen her before. Finally, Shi Mu shook his head, and stood up. A burst of wings flapping sound was heard, and Cai flew over from below. "Shi Tou! Shi Tou!" Cai shouted from afar. "What happened? Why are you so flustered?" Shi Mu's eyebrows slightly creased. "Come with me quickly. Some people are fighting over there. That young lady of the giant tree tribe from yesterday is also one of them." Cai flew over, and landed on Shi Mu's shoulder. Then, he pointed his wings in a certain direction below. Oh! Shi Mu wasn't in the mood to meddle in other people's business again. Her opponents are again the people of the Dark Moon cult. And, young lady is dealing with all of them by herself, Cai added. Shi Mu thought for a moment, and then said, "Let's go and take a look at the situation." After that, he jumped off the peak. A blue light held up his body, and he flew towards the place Cai had just pointed. "Oh, Shi Tou, wait for me," Cai shouted while flying behind him. Shi Mu landed on the ground after a few breaths. However, he was shocked to see the scene. The battle seemed to have ended. Lu Tang, the young lady of the giant tree tribe, appeared to be in a bad condition. Half of her body was drenched in blood. And, a huge wound had been split open in her shoulder. She was in an unconscious state at the moment. 2 disciples of the Dark Moon cult also lay upside down on the ground not far ahead, both of them had already met their death. Shi Mu quickly arrived in front of the green-robed girl. He then turned his hand, and took out a green magic charm. He stuck that magic charm on her wound. Then, a layer of green light pervaded the air, and enveloped the girl. Blood was gushing out of the wound on her shoulder. But, it immediately stopped under the effect of this magic charm. Then, Shi Mu gave her a healing pill, and stimulated his real qi to help it release its effect. Chapter 306, Fire Attribute Peach King. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Lu Tang regained consciousness after a short while. She was startled to see Shi Mu before her. But, her beautiful eyes got smeared with a hint of happiness at the same time. Mr. Mu, thank you so much, Lu Tang said in a weak voice. Don't talk. Your injuries are very severe, Shi Mu replied. This reminded her of something, and she struggled to sit up despite Shi Mu's deterrence. Consequently, the wound on her shoulder cracked open again, and blood gushed out. However, the pain it rendered didn't seem to have any effect on Lu Tang. How long have I been unconscious? She looked anxious when she asked. I had arrived here moments ago. But, it shouldn't have been too long. Otherwise, you should have long been dead owing to the excessive loss of blood because of your injuries. Anyway, what had happened here? Why did you show up here again? Shi Mu's eyes flickered a few times as he shifted the thread of conversation, and fired a couple of questions. The Dark Moon cult's people took advantage of my father and a few close elders' absence to attack our tribe this morning. Moreover, they snatched away the tree protection stone. I have to report this matter to my father. Otherwise, the Dark Moon cult may chase them down on their way back. Lu Tang stood up with difficulty, and then walked forward. You shouldn't walk in this state. Otherwise, you'll certainly collapse again, Shi Mu's brows creased as he said. His voice had barely faded when Lu Tang's feet staggered, and she started to fall. Shi Mu's sharp eyes and agile hands worked together, and supported her body. Then, he said with a sigh, well, where is your father? I will take you there. Really? Thank you so much. The green-robed girl gave him a grateful look. Shi Mu didn't say anything. He simply waved his hand. The blue jade shuttle emerged, and started to float in front of the two people. A flying spirit tool. Lu Tang's face revealed an awestruck look. Shi Mu read an incantation, and flicked his hand to shoot a ray of light into the jade shuttle. The blue jade shuttle expanded to a few times its size the next moment. It turned into a large shuttle which was more than 10 foot in length and 2 feet in width. Come on, Shi Mu drew Lu Tang, and jumped up. Cai also rushed over, and landed on Shi Mu's shoulder. The blue jade shuttle was very fast. But, Shi Mu still stimulated its flying speed with all of his strength since it seemed that the shuttle might fail to keep up the urgency of the situation. A blue light flashed on the surface of the blue shuttle, and it flew into the air. Go north, Lu Tang hastily said. An idea struck Shi Mu's mind at this moment. He controlled the jade shuttle, and made it fly toward the north. The flying speed of the blue shuttle seemed to have been slightly affected by the fact that it was carrying 2 people this time. But, it was still as fast as lightning. The surrounding trees seemed to be passing by at an insanely high speed. There is a black mountain peak nearly 150 miles to the north from here. The Black Feather tribe is settled there. It's also a peaceful barbarian tribe. Father and the other respected elders should be there. They had gone for a discussion with the chief of the Black Feather tribe. My father wants to join hands with them in order to stage a protest against the attack made by the Dark Moon cult yesterday. We can assume now that the Dark Moon cult's abrupt attack on us yesterday was a premeditated plan. Their intention should be to draw my father out of the tribe for some time so that they can seize hold of the town's tree stone, the green-robed girl said in a tone that was dripping with resentment. Oh, by the way, what is tree protection stone? What's its use? Shi Mu felt a little puzzled after listening to her explanation. Lu Tang's face couldn't help but reveal a hesitant look when she heard these questions. You can act as if I haven't asked you anything if you feel too inconvenienced to talk about it, Shi Mu swung his hand as he said. I'm indebted to Mr. Mu for his help. So, it would be highly unreasonable if this little girl conceals something from you. Lu Tang sucked in a long and deep breath. The valley where we met Mr. Mu yesterday is the sacred place of our giant tree tribe. It is called the Land of Peach Blossoms, and it is situated in the depth of the valley. The fire attribute peach fruits that grow there are very efficacious for the enhancement of our tribal people's strength. The surrounding trees are just ordinary fire attribute peach trees. The fact is that the king of fire attribute peach trees grows in the depths of that valley, Lu Tang explained. Shi Mu's face revealed an awestruck look. The peach fruits that grow on the king of fire attribute peach trees contain an abundance of elementary strength. Those fruits are called peach kings. Their effectiveness is far superior to the ordinary peach fruits. The Peach King has the ability to increase the chance of a breakthrough to a whole new realm for those people who practice fire attribute or wood attribute cultivation arts. To be precise, they are extremely precious. Our tribe makes use of the totem formula technique to envelop the fire attribute tree king. This prevents people from stealing the peach fruits. Only those who hold our tribe's tree protection stone can open that formula, Lu Tang said. So, this is the case. But, I had overheard your conversation with those disciples of the Dark Moon cult the other day. Your tribe and the Dark Moon cult had formed an alliance in the past, right? It seemed as if Shi Mu was just nodding. However, his heart had been throbbing with a fit of excitement since he had heard about the fire attribute Peach Kings. They had formed an alliance in those years to fight against the demon race. However, this alliance is not very reliable. The people of the Dark Moon cult are very deceitful. They completely lack the so-called trustworthiness, Lu Tang groaned and said. Shi Mu stole a glance at Lu Tang, and then withdrew his gaze. The two continued their flight in the front direction. In this meantime, Shi Mu inquired about things related to the Western continent from time to time in a roundabout way. Lu Tang didn't seem to take note of his intentions. She told him everything truthfully so long as she was aware of the matter that she was asked about. This girl's knowledge was very limited. But, Shi Mu had still gained a basic understanding of the situation in Western continent. The two people covered a distance of 100 or more miles, and soon reached their destination with the help of the astonishing speed of the Jade Shuttle. But, Shi Mu chose to land outside the mountain peak instead of landing directly in the territory of the Black Feather tribe. Miss Lu Tang, I belong to the Fierce Snake tribe. And, it is a vicious barbarians tribe. So, it would perhaps be inappropriate for me to accompany you into the territory of the Black Feather tribe. So, I'll drop you here, he said. Mr. Mu, I'm deeply grateful to you. I have received several precious favors from you. I wonder if Mr. Mu has some matter that this young girl can help him with. I'll certainly not decline it, Lu Tang said. It would be a great help if Miss Lu Tang has a map of this place. Shi Mu's eyes shone brightly when he asked. A map, of course I have. Mr. Mu, please wait a moment, Lu Tang gawked when she heard these words. But then, she gave him a quick nod. She waved her hand, and a green jade slip appeared in her hand. She then handed it over to Shi Mu. Shi Mu received it, and instilled his spirit sense into it to explore it. And, his face beamed with a delighted look the next moment. The jade slip contained an exhaustive map that illustrated every minor detail within the radius of several thousand miles around the giant tree tribe. In fact, the locations of tribes, cities, and even some dangerous places were properly marked on it. Thank you, I needed this thing very much. We should now part our ways here. But, I'm sure that we will meet someday again. He received the jade slip, and cupped his hands toward Lu Tang with respect. Then, he turned around and walked away. Lu Tang looked at Shi Mu's receding silhouette. There wasn't even a trace of hesitation in his movement. She let out a sigh in her heart. But then, the matter of the dark moon cult popped into her head once again. So, she immediately turned around, and rushed toward the Black Feather tribe. Meanwhile, Shi Mu also accelerated his pace. Shi Tou, your present appearance allows me to think that you haven't departed from that place empty-handed. Cai said while looking at Shi Mu. Certainly not. Shi Mu put away the jade slip. Then, he looked in the direction of the land of peach blossoms of the giant wood tree, and a smile bloomed on his face. He waved his hand, and a blue light emerged. It lifted his body, and scuttled in the direction of the land of peach blossoms. A wave of upheaval had erupted in the Black Feather tribe not long after Shi Mu had departed. A series of green lights flew out of the tribe. People's silhouettes could be faintly seen in those beams of light. They also flew in the direction of the valley where the land of peach blossoms was situated. But, their speed was inferior to Shi Mu's jade shuttle by far. Shi Mu landed outside the valley of the land of peach blossoms after a while. He saw a huge purple light in the valley which seemed to be reaching the sky. Also, the heavenly and spiritual energy in this place was fluctuating in a violent manner. Shi Mu's brows gathered together in a frown as this scene appeared in his field of vision. But, he still felt relieved in his heart. The present situation was enough to indicate that the people sent by the Dark Moon cult were still in the process of breaking the protecting barrier. Therefore, it could be assumed that they hadn't gotten their hands on the Peach Kings yet. Shi Mu restrained the aura around his body. Then, he carefully sneaked into the valley by using the surrounding trees of the valley to camouflage himself. As for Cai, he had already flown into the valley. He possessed excellent eyesight, and a good vantage point. Therefore, any camouflage or cover-up by the opposite party was futile as they couldn't slip through his eyes. Shi Mu also became aware the situation in the valley by drawing support from Cai's vision-sharing ability. He arrived at the place of his previous battle after a few seconds. The purple light still looked deep as before. However, the fluctuation of spiritual energy in the air seemed far more intense. Shi Mu took a light breath. Then, he dashed toward his goal at such an astonishing speed that it seemed as if he had changed into a shadow. He quickly covered a few dozen feet. He then noticed that the valley became increasingly narrow. In addition, the surrounding temperature continued to gradually increase as he proceeded. The Dark Moon cult had assigned 2 people here. It seemed that they had been ordered to hide in an obscure place, and monitor the movements outside. However, the position of these 2 people had long been detected by Cai. Therefore, Shi Mu bypassed them from an overlooked area in a very cautious manner. Then, he quietly sneaked into the deepest part of the valley. His field of vision suddenly got widened as he turned around a corner. This place was the end of the valley. It was a circular open space which was several hundred feet in size. Shi Mu quickly hid behind a boulder. Then, he stuck his head out to have a look at the surroundings. He saw that 50 or 60 people of the Dark Moon cult stood in the open space. They had gathered around a bright red fruit tree. Shi Mu was left stunned for a moment. He had heard from Lu Tang that the King of Fire attribute peach trees grew here. He was under the impression that it was a gigantic fruit tree. However, the red fruit tree before his eyes was only 20 or 30 feet tall. In fact, its height was not even half the height of the ordinary fruit trees that he had seen outside. However, the branches and leaves of this fruit tree looked twisted and curved. In fact, the branches looked like a bright red precious stone. They were emitting waves of red radiance like the luster of a gem. However, there were only a few leaves on the tree. They rather portrayed an image of a tree that was on the verge of decay. However, 3 mauve peach fruits could be seen on the top of this tree. They were as big as a fist. The fruit tree was shrouded by a hemisphere of the protection barrier. This barrier was purple in color. The barrier didn't appear very thick at a glance, but it gave off a kind of indestructible feeling. A dozen or more disciples of the Dark Moon cult had gathered around this fruit tree at this time. These people's bodies exuded a circle of grey light which constituted a very complicated magic array. Then, the array attacked the purple protection barrier. However, it didn't seem to have much effect on that barrier. Shi Mu's eyes streaked across everyone present on the scene, and finally landed on a middle-aged man who wore a round hat. The imposing aura around this man seemed majestic. He was apparently at the primary stage of the earth rank. As for the rest of the people, more than 10 of them were either Xian-Tian martial warriors or star-ranked magicians. And, the remaining people were either Ho-Tian warriors or spirit-ranked warlocks. Shi Mu's eyes slightly narrowed. The Dark Moon cult's sub-altar was supposed to have turned out in full strength at this place according to the information that he had extracted from Lu Tang. The middle-aged man in a round hat held a jade scepter-like purple stone in his hand. He mumbled something. A beam of light departed from his hand, and integrated into the purple stone. So, this is the tree protection stone. Shi Mu looked at the stone from afar, and said inwardly. Ka-cha! The purple jade scepter flew up from the middle-aged man's hand, and emitted glaring purple rays of light, like a small purple sun. The movement of the surrounding people stopped, and they looked in the direction of the light. The middle-aged man's facial expression looked solemn as he brandished his hands in the air. The small purple sun began to slowly drift toward the purple protection barrier that had been set up around the purple tree. And, it soon came in contact with the purple barrier. A purple electric flash emerged from the point of impact. Then, a chi sound rang out. A purple lightning bolt flew out of the jade scepter, and bombarded the purple protection barrier. A loud thunderous sound resounded, and the purple protection barrier gleamed brightly. Then, the lightning dissipated, and the glory of the purple protection barrier slightly dimmed. The middle-aged man in the round hat revealed an exhilarated look, and started to brandish his hands in order to keep stimulating the purple jade scepter. A loud zi-zi sound was heard again. A series of purple lightning bolts flashed out, and bombarded the protection barrier one after another. Simultaneously, the bright radiance of the purple protection barrier continued to decline at an incredible speed. A dozen of breaths passed like this. And, only a thin layer of light remained around the tree at this moment. The middle-aged man's facial expression looked dignified, and he pointed his finger. The purple jade scepter dazzled, and a thick purple lightning bolt darted out of it once again, like a dragon. It cascaded down on the barrier with full force. Ka-cha! The last layer of the protection barrier shattered into pieces with a loud rumble. The middle-aged man revealed an ecstatic look as he saw this scene. He was about to speak something when something strange happened. Chapter 307, Seizes Peach King. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. A black shadow streaked across the void with a shrill and ear-piercing squeal. It was a black arrow which had been shot at a terrific speed. It appeared behind the middle-aged man in the round hat almost instantly. The middle-aged man was absorbed in stimulating the purple jade scepter in order to break the protection barrier at this moment. And, his attention was fixated on the fruit tree in front of him. Therefore, he wasn't paying attention to his defense. Moreover, his subordinates were keeping a sharp watch on the surroundings from the mouth of the valley to the vicinity of the encirclement. So, who would have thought that someone was about to launch a sneak attack? He was profoundly shocked when he noticed the sneak attack. He wanted to move out of the way, but he was already too late to do so. However, he still managed to slightly shift his body at the last moment. Simultaneously, he actuated his real chi to protect the vital parts of his body. A loud ping sound echoed. The black arrow struck the middle-aged man's shoulder. And, a wisp of an indescribably majestic force gushed onto his body through the arrowhead. His real chi shattered into pieces and dispersed in the process of protecting his body. But, the arrow thrust into his right shoulder, and ruthlessly penetrated itself into his body. Fresh blood splattered everywhere as a result. W.A. The middle-aged man opened his mouth, and spurted out a mouthful of blood. Simultaneously, his body flew forward, and crashed to the ground with an enormous force. Altar Lord Qin! The surrounding disciples of the Dark Moon cult exclaimed in alarm. Suddenly, a fuzzy silhouette of a person burst forth from the mouth of the valley. It dashed straight toward the purple peach fruit on the old tree with an incomparably quick speed. Hurry, stop him! Altar Lord Qin was unable to get up since his body had been nailed to the ground by the black arrow. So, he shouted aloud. A few people of the Dark Moon cult were near the fruit tree. They forthwith responded as they heard his words. The weapons in their hands fluttered, and then galloped toward the fuzzy person's silhouette. Humph! The person let out a cold snort in midair, and flicked his arm as he saw this situation. A dozen or more multicolored magic charms burst out of his hand, and broke into pieces in quick succession. A number of lightning bolts, fiery dragons, wind columns, and ice cones emerged in the air the next moment. Then, they separately swept toward the nearby disciples of the Dark Moon cult who wanted to rush over and prevent this person from attacking. Then, a string of spine-chilling screams erupted from all directions. The greater part of these magic charms contained middle-ranked magic formulas. But, there were a couple of magic charms among them that carried high-ranked magic spells. So, their might could not be underestimated. Several disciples of the Dark Moon cult were targeted by these magic charms. Some of these disciples were merely either Hotian warriors or spirit-ranked magicians. Those disciples were immediately overwhelmed by the dazzling light of these magic charms. But, the relatively stronger disciples among them didn't dare to take them lightly, and tried to guard against them. The person's silhouette flashed again. It was Shi Mu. He had seized this opportunity to cross over these people. He swooped straight toward the fruit tree, and threw one of his hands toward the Peach King fruit in order to grab it. But then, a strange thing occurred at this very moment. The ground beside the fruit tree burst open, and a muffled shriek spread from under the ground. Then, a deep red withered rattan drilled out of the ground like a nimble and venomous snake. It rushed directly toward Shi Mu, who was in midair at the moment. The withered red rattan was extremely fast. Moreover, it had rushed towards Shi Mu from a tricky angle. Shi Mu realized that he would get stabbed by this rattan before he touched the Peach King if he didn't try to avoid it. Shi Mu's complexion turned cold. But then, he whirled in the air. Simultaneously, a black light flickered on the surface of his body. The fact was that he didn't have the slightest intention of dodging the attack. Clang! A loud metal clanging sound rang out. His body was struck, and sent flying a few feet away from his original place. He somersaulted in the air, and stood up straight. However, his complexion had turned pale, and he had rested one of his hands on his waist. Fortunately, he had gotten hold of a purple peach fruit, it was in his other hand at the moment. The clothes around his waist had been torn to shreds, and his skin had been exposed. A black scale could be seen on his exposed skin. The black scale looked slightly broken at the moment. Fresh blood was gurgling out of it. However, the condition of his injuries made it clear that he had received only a few external injuries. None of them had reached his vital organs. A tall and blood-red silhouette slowly drilled out of the ground near the fruit tree at this moment. It was over 20 feet in height. Its appearance bore a great similarity to that of the radish shuttle tree demon that Shi Mu had previously killed. However, the demon chi it was emanating revealed that it had attained Earth-ranked strength. In fact, it seemed far more formidable compared to the chief of the giant tree tribe, as well as Altar Lord Qin. Meanwhile, the ground of the open space revealed a burst of tremor. Then, two lofty trees came into appearance with two back-to-back flashes of green light. They stood behind the blood-red tree man, as if they were its bodyguards. The spiritual aura that these two were sending forth was the formidable aura of a Xian-Tian-ranked warrior. They are radish shuttle tree demons. The facial expression of the Dark Moon cult's people drastically changed. It was obvious that they hadn't expected that these tree demons would appear. So, they hurriedly gathered beside the middle-aged man in the round hat. He is Lord Shuekui, he's the general of the radish shuttle demon. Altar Lord Qin had pulled the black arrow out of his body by this time. He stood up, and his gaze drew toward the blood-red tree demon. The strength of this arrow was extremely vigorous. On top of that, it had penetrated through his real qi, and had injured the bones and muscles of his shoulder. Therefore, his left arm was unable to move at present. He, Altar Lord Qin is indeed blessed with good memory since he hasn't forgotten this lord. It seems that your excellency is also interested in Yang attribute Peach King. Lord Xueqiu spoke up in a human voice. But, his voice sounded hoarse and unpleasant. Altar Lord Qin took out a pill from his clothes, and swallowed it. Then, he looked at Shi Mu. He was about to say something when two shrill screams spread from outside the valley. Then, a burst of ear-piercing whistling sound came from afar. After that, over 20 rays of green light approached them at a very high speed, and landed in the vicinity. The green lights flickered, and 20 figures came into appearance in quick succession. These people were the members of the Giant Tree Tribe. The chief of the Giant Tree Tribe and Lu Tang were also part of this group. A few people among them were deeply shocked when they saw the present situation in the valley. Altar Lord Qin, our Giant Tree Tribe and your Dark Moon cult have always walked their own paths. They have never interfered with each other. But you affronted our tribe's restricted area yesterday. And you again offended my tribe today. In addition, you have joined forces with the Radish Shuttle Demon race with an intention to get a share of the fire attribute Peach King. Don't you think that you have gone too far? The chief of Giant Tree Tribe looked at the blood-red tree demon. Then, his gaze shifted to Altar Lord Qin of the Dark Moon cult as he said in a low voice. Tribe chief, you should try to understand the situation before pulling such an act. Let me tell you the truth, the matter of this Peach King is going to be settled today. In addition, I and Lord Xuequi just happened to bump into each other here. I hadn't sketched out any plans to join hands with his race. However, you have drawn my attention to this idea. This is indeed a good idea. I wonder what Lord Xuequi thinks about it. Altar Lord Qin's eyes whirled around once. Then, he turned his head, and said while looking at Xuequi. Ga, this idea is pretty good. We should join hands against our common enemy. Sui Kui burst into a strange laughter as he replied. The complexion of the Giant Tree Tribe's chief sank. He hadn't yet opened his mouth to speak when Lu Tang's elegant eyes turned to look at Shi Mu who stood on the other side of the fire attribute Tree King. Lu Tang stood beside her father. Then, her eyes got pulled toward the purple Peach King in his right hand. And, she called out in alarm, Mr. Mu, how could you possibly be here? This Peach King. The people of the Dark Moon cult and the Radish Shuttle Tree demons had flooded the valley at the moment. This had triggered the anger of the Giant Tree Tribe's people, and their gazes were stuck to these invaders. Therefore, they hadn't noticed Shi Mu until now. But, they cast sidelong glances at Shi Mu in quick succession when they heard these words. This fire attribute Peach King is so popular that even I couldn't stop myself from craving for it. Therefore, I picked one without your due permission. I truly feel apologetic for this. Shi Mu was about to open his mouth when his eyebrows plunged into a frown, and a hint of exhilaration flashed across his eyes. He then opened his mouth, and said a few words of apology. At the same time, he received the Peach King in his vast earth ring. Shi Mu had said these words casually, as if he didn't even mean them. But, they turned out to be extraordinarily significant for the people of the Giant Tree Tribe. The present situation was ample enough to conclude that Shi Mu hadn't joined forces with the Dark Moon cult. They could clearly see the present situation. The Dark Moon cult's people had used a trick to break through the defensive barrier in an attempt to seize hold of the Peach King fruits. The Dark Moon cult had the support of an Earth-ranked powerhouse Altar Lord Qin. In addition, the strength of the 10 or more disciples of the Dark Moon cult wasn't inferior to that of any Xian Tian-ranked or Star-ranked expert. Furthermore, Xuequi also seemed to be a part of this mission. He commanded the strength of a middle-stage Earth-ranked powerhouse. But, Shi Mu had been able to grab the Peach King from the hands of these formidable people. It was like snatching food from a tiger's mouth. This had left the people of the giant tree tribe with a sense of deep amazement. You! The giant tree tribe's chief scowled in anger. He was about to say something when he was interrupted by Shi Mu's words. This Mu isn't an unscrupulous person who doesn't pay for things. I owe you a favor since I have taken a thing that belongs to your tribe. Your tribe won't be able to confront the enemy alone in the given situation. I'll assist you in driving away these people who have come here with an intention of capturing the Peach King. You can consider this as a return of favor. What do you say? The giant tree tribe's people were dumbfounded when they heard his words. In fact, they even stared at Shi Mu with an inconceivable look on their faces. They obviously couldn't believe in the boastful words of a mere Xian-Tian warrior. Lu Tang's eyes brightened up when she saw the black feathered arrow on the ground behind Altar Lord Qin. It was stained with blood. She then saw the wound on Qin Tan's left shoulder, and couldn't help but think of something. She moved close to their tribe's chief, and whispered a few words in his ear. And, her words immediately changed his facial expression. Extremely arrogant. The Lord wants this thing. How can he let this boy here be boisterous? Altar Lord Qin hadn't spoken anything yet. But, Shuekui issued a cold snort, and a rattan rolled upward towards a peach fruit on top of the fruit tree. A white light flashed in Shi Mu's hand, and a long bone-white bow appeared in his hand. The bowstring quivered, and a black arrow shot out like an electric current. It dashed straight toward the overhanging creeper vine. Shuekui hastily moved aside to dodge the arrow. It seemed that he was rather afraid of this black arrow. A person's silhouette flashed at this moment. It was Shi Mu. He had rushed over in front of Shuekui, and had hacked a black blade shadow toward his head. Shuekui was alarmed since he hadn't expected that Shi Mu's movement would be so fast. A spurt of blood light gushed on the surface of his body, and his bulky arms changed into a blood-red jade stone to receive the attack. The two ordinary tree demons beside him were about to pounce on Shi Mu when a golden sword light darted out of Shi Mu's body. It turned into a massive sword shadow which blotted out the entire sky as it hacked toward these two tree demons below. The tree demons were shocked by this. They stopped their movement, and stood firm to resist the approaching sword shadow. Leave these radish shuttle tree demons to me. You try to hold up the Dark Moon cult's people. Shi Mu said to Lu Tang and her tribesmen in a loud voice. Go! The chief of the giant tree tribe shouted to command everyone. Then, he galloped toward the Dark Moon cult's people along with his tribesmen. Lu Tang's face got smeared with a slightly complicated look as she cast a glance at Shi Mu. She then clenched her teeth, and rushed toward a star-ranked magician of the Dark Moon cult who was in the midst of casting a spell. The Dark Moon cult's people were comparatively larger in number. But, their Earth-ranked warrior was currently in an injured state owing to Shi Mu's arrow. This had awfully affected their strength. Therefore, the two sides seemed to be evenly matched for the time being. The small valley turned into a battlefield for a while. Magic spells, sword lights, and so on were swirling in the air. A black light flickered on Shi Mu's body, and his black blade light experienced a fit of fluctuation. Then, it started to flutter up and down in the air as he started to launch attacks on Shuekui. His current cultivation and the power of his spirit sense would enable him to maintain his transformed beast mode state for more than a quarter of an hour. And, he also possessed enormous physical strength which could be considered close to 20,000 pounds in terms of brute force. These factors had helped him in coping up with Shuekui in a smooth and unrestrained manner. Shuekui became increasingly astounded by Shi Mu's strength as the fight continued. After all, the man before his eyes was a barbarian who had barely reached the peak of the Xian-Tian rank after he had resorted to the totem body transformation. But, whether it was this barbarian man's strength, his movement, or the reaction speed, nothing was inferior to him in any aspect. Moreover, the black scales on Shi Mu's body were extremely tenacious, so much so that they could receive the direct attacks of Shuekui as if they were nothing. The long black blade in Shi Mu's hand was also rather special. It didn't appear very large, but it possessed astonishing weight. The degree of its sharpness was also astounding. Xuequi had deployed a secret technique that had further strengthened his rattan arms. Their present degree of hardness could be placed on par with any spirit tool. However, they still failed to leave a trace on the black blade. The other two tree demons had been restricted by the golden sword. They had found themselves incapable of transgressing the terrifying boundary of the sword. The earth-ranked warriors of the demon race are very mediocre. Shi Mu's face revealed an expression of sarcasm as he said. You are asking for death. Xuequi issued a thunderous bellow, and his entire body emitted an even brighter blood-red radiance. After that, the magic image of a blood-red gigantic tree emerged behind him. It was 20 or 30 feet in size. Chapter 308, Demon Races Directory. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The magic image of the lofty blood-red tree had a pair of long and bulky branches, like a rattan. The top of these branches was covered with lush green sharp thorns. The rattan-like branches shook once. Numerous green sharp thorns burst out of them, and swept straight toward Shi Mu. After that, a ray of green light flashed on the surface of the branches. And, this gave birth to numerous vast-stretched thorns once again. But, Shi Mu's entire body was wrapped up in a layer of blue light as well as a layer of golden light at this moment. The fact was that Shi Mu had already added the support of the Wind Shadow magic charm and the Golden Star magic charm to his body. He had done so the moment the magic image of the big tree had appeared before his eyes. His black blade miraculously transformed into several layers of blade lights, and resisted Lord Xuequi's attack. Simultaneously, Shi Mu tried to evade the bombardment of those incisive green thorns. However, the opposite party possessed the strength of an earth-ranked middle-stage powerhouse. On top of that, he had summoned the magic image to draw support from. This had imposed a surplus pressure on Shi Mu. And, Shi Mu was gradually finding it hard to endure this pressure. Consequently, the golden star protective shield on the surface of Shi Mu's body disappeared only after a few rounds of fight. His clothes had been torn to shreds. And, the scales on his body had become tainted with blood. Fortunately, the firmness of his body had far surpassed that of any ordinary martial warrior after having practiced the 6th stage of the art of breeding strong evil ape. Otherwise, these attacks would have long fractured his muscles and bone even though he had the scales to protect his body. Droplets of sweat were oozing from Shi Mu's forehead at the moment. He was exerting the entirety of his might to ward off the enemy's attack. He was making use of his black blade as well as all kind of magic charms. However, he had been continually retreating from the battle encirclement. But, Lord Xuequi hadn't loosened a bit. Instead, he had been pressing Shi Mu harder and harder. The black blade and the thick rattan suddenly collided with each other in a violent manner. This rendered a powerful jolt to Shi Mu's body, and he staggered for a moment. Ga! Lord Xuequi burst into a strange laughter, and stamped his foot on the ground. Several long blood-red rattans drilled out of the ground, and wound around Shi Mu's feet at lightning speed. This left Shi Mu incapable of budging. Conceited boy, now die! Lord Xuequi thundered loudly. The green thorns on the surface of the magic image's two branches radiated splendid green luminescence in his background. They were about to fire again. It seemed that they wanted to strike and kill Shi Mu in one fell swoop. However, Shi Mu raised his head at this moment, and the corners of his mouth curved into an arc. A mass of black smoke flashed behind Lord Xuequi the next moment. And, a white silhouette came into appearance. Its whole body was enveloped in a mass of white light. So, it was difficult to see its appearance clearly. However, a graceful and slender figure could be vaguely seen amid the light. The white silhouette waved its hand, and a short black stick-like thing emerged in its hand. The silhouette lifted the heavy stick in a manner that made it seem very light. And then, it pounded it toward Lord Xuequi's back. Lord Shuekui also responded considerably fast. He stimulated the magic image behind him to stop the attack at once. And, two rattan-like branches intertwined and condensed into a blood-red rattan shield in front of him. Then, a faint green light appeared on the surface of the shield, and several barbs appeared on the shield. The spiritual aura this white silhouette was exuding didn't seem stronger than that of Shuekui in any respect. However, the next act still left Shuekui with a profound shock. The black short stick appeared as if it was as light as a feather, as if it lacked strength. However, the surface of the blood-red rattan shield revealed a fit of tremor as soon as the short stick fell on it. In addition, the spirit power contained in the rattan shield reduced to half in an instant. Even the green barbs started to shatter and disperse in quick succession. Then, the surface of the shield turned gloomy, and collapsed along with the big blood-red tree's magic image. The short stick then moved, and pounded on Lord Shuekui's body in a fierce manner. Boom! The wisp of an incomparably large force rushed forth from the short stick in a crazy manner, and infiltrated his body. Lord Shuekui's facial expression profoundly changed. Then, a ka-cha sound spread from his body, and his body split into two segments the next moment. Then, a whoosh sound was heard as an armored palm stretched out with a lightning speed. It grabbed Lord Shuekui's head, and exerted its full strength on it. A crisp ka-cha sound was heard. Lord Shuekui's head was crushed to pieces, as if it were a watermelon. Consequently, red and white substances splashed in all directions. Then, a cluster of green light flashed, and flew out of his crushed head. A miniature tree demon was curled up in that green light. His face was suffused with an appalled look that couldn't be explained in words. It was the soul of that radish shuttle demon's general. The general's beast soul had barely flown a little distance after its appearance when a mass of black smoke followed after. This black smoke caught up with the soul, and wrapped around it. Then, the white silhouette pulled the black smoke back towards its hand. It grabbed the cluster of green light, and swallowed it. After that, the silhouette flashed, and vanished into thin air. Only 2 or 3 seconds had passed since the appearance of the white silhouette. It hadn't only killed an Earth-rank middle-stage powerhouse, but had also gobbled up his soul within a matter of seconds. The facial expression of the other 2 radish shuttle tree demons abruptly changed as they saw that their lord had been slaughtered. They blocked a few attacks of the golden sword shadows. Then, a green light flashed on their bodies. And, they drilled into the ground, and made a clean escape from the battlefield. Shi Mu felt as if his feet had loosened. The blood-red rattan which had wound his feet started to wither away at a fast speed. Shi Mu waved his hand, and recalled the golden sword. Then, his eyes turned and looked at the battling group on the other side. The people of the Dark Moon cult had summoned a large number of dead spirit creatures under Altar Lord Qin's leadership. And, they all were in a tangle with the chief and the other people of the giant tree tribe. In addition, over a dozen corpses lay on the ground. Most of these corpses were of the low-ranked disciples of the Dark Moon cult. But, 2 or 3 corpses belonged to the giant tree tribe as well. Lord Shuekui has been killed, someone shouted at this time. Everyone was absorbed in a fierce battle. Therefore, there were only a handful of people apart from Altar Lord Qin and the giant tree tribe's chief who had their attention fixed on Shi Mu's battle situation. They turned pale with fright and shock when they discovered that Shi Mu had taken down Lord Shuekui, an Earth-ranked middle-stage powerhouse. Let's go! Altar Lord Qin stole a glance at Shi Mu with a sense of fear in his heart, and shouted in a loud voice. He held a grey bone stick in his hand. It was a spirit tool. It gleamed with a magnificent grey radiance, and condensed into a massive grey human skull. Then, the grey skull pounced toward the giant tree tribe's chief, and compelled him to draw a few steps back. Meanwhile, Altar Lord Qin turned his hand and took out a yellow magic charm. He then held it between his fingers, and crushed it to pieces. An expansive yellow light emerged, and shrouded the surrounding area within a few feet. Then, the yellow light flashed, and all the disciples of the Dark Moon cult disappeared without a trace along with the dead spirit creatures. Altar Lord Qin had played a very decisive role here as soon as he had realized that the situation had turned very bad. And, he had taken the decision to retreat without any hesitation. Only the people of the Giant Tree Tribe and Shi Mu remained in the valley at this moment. The Giant Tree Tribe's chief and a few people beside him exchanged glances with one another. Then, they walked over to Shi Mu, touched their chest single-handedly, and said with deep veneration, "Thank you so much for breaking the siege, Mr. Mu. Your Excellency is indeed very strong. We have offended you before. But, we hope that Your Excellency will forgive us. Those people have retreated from here. So, this Mu's promise should be considered fulfilled. So, I'll take my leave now." Shi Mu didn't say anything further. He simply waved his hand, and the blue jade shuttle propped up his body. It then flew him outside the mountain valley. Lu Tang also wanted to say something to Shi Mu, but Shi Mu had flown away without giving her a chance to speak. So, she couldn't help but feel disappointed, as if she had lost something. It is fortunate that he took only one Peach King fruit. The chief looked at the Fire Attribute Tree King, and heaved a sigh of relief. "Little Tang, you and Elder Peng return to the tribe and invite a few priests to this place. We need those people to fix the totem magic array here," the chief said to Lu Tang and another middle-aged barbarian. Lu Tang complied, and left the place along with the middle-aged barbarian. "Great Elder, you must have noticed that white person's silhouette a moment ago, right?" The chief spoke to a grizzled-haired old barbarian man who stood next to him. "That white silhouette stayed here for only a fleeting moment. So, even I couldn't see it clearly. It seems to have some relation with the soul magician's magic arts of the Dark Moon cult. However, it was formidable enough to kill the Earth-ranked middle-stage demon general in an instant. This kind of strength is appalling," the grizzled-haired old barbarian man replied while shaking his head. "Right. But, Mu Shi had undergone a beastly transformation. And, that technique was clearly the secret technique of our barbarian race. Anyway, he didn't use his power to take away all our Peach King fruits. And, that is indeed a fortunate thing for us," the chief said with a long and deep sigh. Shi Mu flew away from the valley at first. After that, he prompted the movement of the blue jade shuttle, and flew for some time. He soon found a secluded mountain to descend. He was about to land when a plume of black smoke bubbled up beside him. Then, a white person's silhouette emerged from that smoke. It was Yan Luo. It held the black meteoric iron stick in its hand. "Yan Luo, I'm extremely grateful to you. I know I wasn't a suitable match for that earth-ranked tree demon," Shi Mu said as his eyes fell on Yan Luo. "I had come there to return your stick. Arrange a lot of spirit stones for the next time. I'll consider this instance as an advance payment." Yan Luo threw the black stick towards Shi Mu while it was speaking. Then, it turned around since it wanted to return to the dead spirit world. "Wait a minute." Shi Mu put out his hand, and received the black stick. Then, he shouted to stop Yan Luo. Yan Luo stopped, and turned its head to look at him. "How do you make this stick swallow the spirit power? I tried it plenty of times. But, I didn't reap any concrete benefits, except for arousing the devouring ability of my black blade," Shi Mu said. "It's impossible to achieve this level with your current strength. You have to wait until your strength soars to the earth rank. Then, we'll talk about it." Yan Luo hesitated for a moment. Then, it replied in a dull and sinking voice. After that, a grey smoke flashed on its body, and Yan Luo blended into the void. Shi Mu still wanted to say something, but Yan Luo had already returned to the dead spirit world. He raised his black stick, only to find that its weight had returned to what it had been when it had been refined. He couldn't help but smile bitterly while shaking his head. Shi Mu had obtained many spirit stones from here. But, they would certainly be squandered by Yan Luo in due course. However, Shi Mu had got the green flower as well as Yan Luo's timely help in exchange for those spirit stones. This could still be regarded as fairly good deal. Shi Mu thought about such points in order to console himself. And, he was able to calm himself down as a result. He returned the short stick to his back. Then, a purple light flashed in his hand as he took out the Peach King fruit. There was a hint of excitement across his face since he had finally obtained this fire attribute Peach King fruit. He was now confident that he could practice the Book of Flaming Red Ape to the 9th stage within half a year of time as long as he found a suitable fire spirit place. Moreover, he could step into the Xiantian advanced stage by doing so. He knew that he could have obtained all 3 fire attribute Peach Kings. But then, he would have been no different than a robber or bandit. He had helped the opposite party to drive away such a formidable enemy. So, 1 peach fruit could be considered as an ample reward for this help. He couldn't have staked his claim for the other 2 Peach Kings since his conscience wouldn't have allowed him to do so. Shi Mu put away the Peach King. Then, he slipped his hand in his bosom, and fished out a bracelet-sized black ring. This was a storage magic tool which Shi Mu had obtained from Lord Shuequi's body. It could be regarded as today's second harvest. However, he hadn't checked it yet. Shi Mu's brows furrowed as he poured a wisp of his spirit sense into the round black ring in order to explore it. There was enormous space in the ring. In fact, it was almost twice as large as the vast earth ring. But, the things inside. His eyebrows creased. It couldn't be denied that the space in the ring was considerably large. However, there was hardly anything in it. There was only a small pile of spirit stones and some miscellaneous items. Some books were also among those items. It seemed that there were more or less 10,000 spirit stones in the ring. However, those miscellaneous items could be regarded as precious stuff. All these things surely constituted fairly good wealth for Shi Mu. But, they didn't seem to match Lord Shuequi's status. After all, he had been an earth-ranked powerhouse. Shi Mu transferred everything from the black ring into his vast earth ring. His eyes suddenly moved. He turned his hand, and took out a booklet. It was one of the many ancient books that were stored in the black ring. The Demon Race's Directory. A gleam of happiness flashed through Shi Mu's face. He was in an urgent need to learn more about the Western continent at this time. And, this book was exactly what he needed. But, this wasn't an appropriate place to begin his exploration of the book. Shi Mu's gaze suddenly shifted to a shadow that was far away. Cai was flying toward him at a very fast speed from the direction of the valley. Chapter 309, Swamp of Snakes. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. There was a cave halfway up a mountain peak. Shi Mu was sitting on top of a blue rock in front of this cave. He finally closed the book in his hand since he had read everything recorded in it. This book had given him a basic idea of the Western continent as well as the demon race. It contained information related to the habits, characteristics, and other things of many demon beasts. This ancient book suggested that the Western continent had an extensive area. In fact, its area was a lot larger than the Eastern continents. Also, it was blessed with a plentiful amount of natural resources. However, this continent was also characterized by its many sparsely populated areas. In fact, the population of this continent was far lesser than the Eastern continents. The Eastern continent was occupied and revered by the human race, whereas the Western continent was primarily dominated by the demon race. The barbarian race occupied the second place in this continent. As for the ordinary humans, they were very rarely seen here. The number of small and big territories of the demon race was beyond counting. In fact, they were scattered in every corner of this continent. It could be said that the demon beasts belonged to 72 branches if they were thoroughly traced back to their foundations. The majority of them were subdivided into animal-type demon beast. But, there were also some plant-type demon beasts. And, those radish shuttles were one of such plant-type demon beasts. A demon beast could partially transform into human form if its strength reached such an extent that it became equivalent to that of the human race. Such demon beasts were called commanders. And, a demon beast could undergo a major transformation into a human form if its strength ascended to the degree of the earth rank. Such demon beasts were called generals. And, the demon beasts that acquired the strength of a heaven-ranked powerhouse could transform into a true human form. They were called demon kings. However, only a handful of demon beasts had truly ascended to the rank of the demon king in the western continent since time immemorial. This could be said based on the record that Shi Mu had obtained. Shi Mu received the ancient book in his vast earth ring. He then waved his hand, and a jade slip appeared. It was the map of the nearby area. He had received this from Liu Tang. Shi Mu infused his spirit sense into it in order to explore it. A fairly large map emerged in his mind the next moment. A large number of towns, cities, and tribes that fell under the influence of the barbarian race were marked on it. In addition, some annotations could also be seen which indicated whether the area belonged to the peaceful barbarians or the vicious barbarians. Shi Mu had already figured that Western continent's peaceful barbarians and vicious barbarians weren't on good terms with each other either. He could tell this in light of the giant tree tribe's chief's initial approach towards him. Perhaps, he might not receive a favorable treatment if he went to any peaceful barbarian city here with his vicious barbarian's identity. His eyes fell on the northernmost part of the map. A very large vicious barbarian tribe was located there. It turned out to be the fierce snake tribe based on the annotation mentioned on the map. And, the area where Shi Mu was at present fell under the territory of the peaceful barbarians. Shi Mu intended to make his way to that place which was under the influence range of the vicious barbarians since the peaceful barbarian tribe wouldn't welcome him. Cai flew up from the bottom of the mountain peak. He held a purple fruit in his mouth. He landed on Shi Mu's shoulder, and gobbled up the whole fruit in a few mouthfuls. He then narrowed his eyes in a relaxed manner, and asked, "Shi Tou, you've been racking your mind for quite a while. Have you decided the place we should go to now? You're so talkative. Let's go." Shi Mu flicked his finger at Cai's head as he said. He then put away the jade slip, and gazed toward the north. There was a vast expanse of swampy waters. Luxuriant thickets of grasses were spread everywhere. A few birds would fly from the thick patches of grass every now and then. A thin layer of mist was floating over the water. It constituted an illustrious landscape of a hazy place. Shi Mu stood on a high ground, and was looking around at the moment. Cai squatted on his shoulder, but there was a dispirited look on his face. This place was an extensive marshland. And, most of this area was called Swamp of Snakes. Nearly 1 month had passed since he had departed from the giant tree tribe that day. Shi Mu hadn't been in a hurry to speed up his journey during this time. In fact, he had spent half of this time in his training in an attempt to maximize his strength. After all, this crisis-ridden western continent was pervaded by lurking dangers, so much so that the eastern continent couldn't even be compared with it in this aspect. Therefore, even a little enhancement in his strength could play a substantial role in ensuring his safety. The Swamp of Snakes was a part of the fierce snake tribe's territory according to the map provided by Liu Tang. Shi Mu would reach a large city called Peaceful Sun City if he passed through here. That city naturally came under the fierce snake tribe's jurisdiction. As the name suggested, numerous kinds of snake-type demon beasts resided in the Swamp of Snakes. Many of these demon beasts were regarded as extremely poisonous. Therefore, this place was well known as a dangerous place in the local area. However, this marshland also abounded with various kinds of heavenly and earthly treasures. In fact, it was a paradise for opportunistic people who were truly devoted to finding treasures. Shi Mu had come to the marshland almost 3 days ago. He had weighed this matter over and over again, and had eventually arrived at the decision that he should pass through the swamp instead of taking a detour. "Shi Tou, you can pass through this swamp simply by flying, can't you? So, why are you so desperate to pass through this swamp on foot? This place isn't only very dirty and stinky, but it's laden with all kinds of dangers as well," Cai said. I have to blend into the Western continent as quickly as possible so that I can understand the various aspects of this place to the best of my ability. And, I think experiencing the nature is the fastest way to achieve my goal. Moreover, the adventure of treasure hunting is a delightful experience, Shi Mu replied. Shi Mu had no idea how many such dangers he would have to pass through on his way to the rising to the heaven peak. So, it was nearly impossible to take a detour or choose to fly whenever he wanted. Moreover, flying through the air might not be a safe option in this perilous place, especially the swampy areas. Swampy areas were generally known for their flat terrain. So, flying in the air over a marshland would expose him to everyone. And, that would make him prone to ambushes. Shi Mu swept his gaze around in a vigilant manner. Then, he went down the highland, and walked in the forward direction. He couldn't show the slightest sign of carelessness while walking in such a dangerous place. He had noticed that the creatures in this marshland were very good at camouflage. He had already suffered many hardships over the past 3 days. Shi Mu had barely passed through a jet-black thicket of grass when a bang sound was heard. That thicket of grass burst open. And, the big and ferocious mouth of a beast pounced at Shi Mu in an attempt to bite his feet. It was a huge pitch-black python. Half its body was still hidden in the ground. Shi Mu had already sensed this danger. He pointed his foot below, and drew backwards with one swift movement. Thus, he managed to avoid the python's big mouth with his quick response. The huge black python ended up biting the air as a result. But then, its long body swayed from side to side, and drilled out of the ground. Its huge body was 40 or 50 feet long, and as thick as a lower millstone. Its faint green snake eyes were emitting an ice-cold radiance. Shi Mu's brows twitched into a frown when he noticed that this was a black earthworm python demon beast. It was at the peak of the Hotian realm. Shi Mu had bumped into these types of python several times over the past few days. He flicked his fingers, and the golden sword light shot out in order to chop down the black python. The black python wasn't smart. It exuded a shriek as he saw the sword flying toward it. And then, opened its big mouth, and bit toward the golden sword light. Shi Mu flicked his fingers again, and the golden flying sword streaked across an arc at an astonishing speed. The huge head of the python flew up in the air, and a spurt of blood splattered everywhere. The fact was that its body had been hacked into 2 parts by the sword. It made a few futile twitches on the ground for a moment. Then, it became motionless. Shi Mu waved his hand to recall the golden sword. Then, he walked up to the python's body. He turned his hand, and took out the beast soul bag. Then, a red light darted from the bag. A cluster of black lights flew out of the python's body, and got sucked into the beast soul bag. Shi Mu wanted to collect as many beast souls as he could. In fact, this was another reason why he hadn't chosen to take a detour or fly over the swamps. The ominous python's totem on his chest was very close to ascending to the advanced stage. All he needed to do was to break through this critical juncture. After that, the might of the secret totem technique would again make an illustrious growth. The fact was that Shi Mu hadn't been able to accumulate beast souls in the eastern continent due to various reasons. But, a sea of opportunities had appeared before him now. He naturally didn't want to let these fortuitous opportunities slip by. Shi Mu didn't leave this place immediately after wrapping things up. He instead walked toward the place from where the black python had just popped out. According to the demon race's directory, there was a higher possibility of finding a spirit grass called wind spirit grass in the places where black earthworm pythons resided. This kind of spirit grass was very efficient in detoxifying most of the snake venoms. Therefore, it was considered very precious. However, Shi Mu's brows suddenly wrinkled, and a look of vigilance flashed through his eyes. A little fluctuation occurred in the mist before him. Then, a sound of footsteps spread from it. Then, 5 or 6 people walked over in his direction. These people revealed a stunned look on their faces as if they hadn't expected to run into Shi Mu here. Shi Mu's gaze swept over these people. He noticed that a deep red python's pattern was embellished on the clothes of these people. This was the symbol of the fierce snake tribe. There was a man with a big stature in this group of people. He seemed to be their leader. He carried a sword on his back. This person was the strongest in this group. He was a Xiantian advanced stage warrior, while the other people were only at the Houtian realm. The piercing gaze of that swordsman swept over Shi Mu's body. Then, his eyes glued to the vast earth ring in Shi Mu's finger, and the beast soul bag on his waist. He then noticed the corpse of the black python, and a gleam of surprise flashed through his eyes. He then said, "Boy, who are you? You have dared to gather a beast soul openly in the swamp of snakes." Shi Mu cast a fleeting glance at the people in front of him. Then, he retraced his gaze. After that, he didn't pay attention to them, and instead continued his search work in the ground nearby. The swordsman was enraged by this. But, Shi Mu's attitude had left him to feel unsure about the situation. So, he threw a meaningful glance at a thin man who stood beside him. "Boy, boss is asking you something. Are you deaf or dumb? Do you want to die here?" A shua sound was heard as the thin man drew out his machete, and aimed it at Shi Mu. Then, he said in a loud voice. The subordinates of the swordsman surrounded Shi Mu in a casual manner. Shi Mu's eyes brightened up at this moment, and he stepped forward quickly. He picked up a bunch of pale green small grasses from a certain thicket of grass, and received it in his vast earth ring in an unhurried manner. He then raised his head, looked at those people, and asked, "What are you anyway? Are you in charge of the beast souls that I am collecting here?" "Boy, we are the patrol team of the fierce snake tribe, and we have been stationed in the swamp of snakes. We are specialized in dealing with poachers like you. We have apprehended both the thief and the stolen goods. You better allow yourself to be seized without putting up a pointless fight," the swordsman shouted in a stern voice since he had noticed that Shi Mu was an outsider. "Oh, the patrol team doesn't allow other tribes to infringe on their territory, right?" Shi Mu couldn't help sneering inwardly as his sweeping gaze ran over the beast soul bags hung on each person's body. Then, he opened his mouth to ask. "And, you know pretty well about this," the swordsman said. "But, I'm also a member of the fierce snake tribe. So, I don't think I can be considered a poacher here," Shi Mu replied while revealing the fierce snake's totem on his chest. Shi Mu didn't pay much attention to these people. But, he had barely set foot in the territory of the fierce snake tribe, and had decided that he should keep a low-profile appearance here. The swordsman and the others were initially dumbfounded when they saw the totem mark. But, they put on a mild smile afterwards. Shi Mu's appearance had certainly left them with a sense of fear. "Oh, so you are one of us. But, don't you know that you need to pay spirit stones in order to get the hunting qualification here? It looks like it's your first time here. So, you obviously don't understand the set of rules that work in this place. Hand over the beast souls that you have poached here along with the storage ring that you are wearing. And, we will let you go without carrying further investigation. We'll even provide you with a horse," the swordsman stated with a nasty laughter. Shi Mu let out a long sigh, and his facial expression gradually became cold. The opposite party had obviously noticed that he was young and alone in such a place. So, the idea of plundering him had naturally cropped up in their mind. "What? Boy, do you still want to show your teeth?" the swordsman shouted in a stern voice. The other people also drew their weapons as he said this. Shi Mu turned his hand, took out a magic charm, and stuck it on his body. A layer of green light enveloped his entire body. Then, his stature flashed and appeared in front of the swordsman the next moment. After that, the black blade appeared in his hand with a flash of black light, and he hacked it towards the swordsman. The swordsman was taken aback since he hadn't expected that Shi Mu would be as fast as a demon. But, he was a Xiantian advanced stage warrior. So, his response timing wasn't slow either. He bellowed, and pulled out the big sword from his back. A green light shone on the sword's blade as it moved forward to receive the black blade. Then, a loud metal clanging sound resounded. The swordsman's complexion changed very terribly as a terrorizing and massive force rolled from the black blade and pounded him. He felt as if a hill had been slammed heavily on him. His feet slipped deep into the swampy ground. In fact, he had gotten submerged to his knees by the impact of the force. Chapter 310, Red-Ringed Demon Python. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu's strike went well as he had expected. He then took advantage of the swordsman whose half-body had sunk into the ground. Shi Mu's body flashed, and he pounded his leg on the swordsman's chest with full force, like a long whip. Pang! The swordsman was kicked, and sent flying in the air. He flew a few feet backwards before he crashed to the ground. His subordinates hadn't thought that their leader would be defeated in a single blow. These people had been planning to pounce upon Shi Mu just a moment ago. But, their bodies turned stiff when they witnessed this scene. They gazed into Shi Mu's eyes with a petrified look on their face. Shi Mu stood up while fiddling with a black beast soul bag. He had seized the chance, and grabbed this beast soul bag from the swordsman right before the swordsman was kicked to fly in the air. He then poured his spirit sense into the bag, and his face beamed with a hint of delighted look. The swordsman crawled up to his feet with difficulty. And, a wisp of blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. The fact was that 2 bones of his ribs had been broken by Shi Mu's kick. A hint of fear was clearly visible in his eyes at the moment. Shi Mu shot a glance at the swordsman. Then, his gaze turned to see the other people around him. Those people hurried back to the side, and made way for him to pass. Shi Mu turned around, and walked away. Suo, but, he had barely taken a few steps when a light sound spread from afar. Shi Tou, watch out! There's something ahead! Cai exclaimed. He had been standing on Shi Mu's shoulder this entire time. Shi Mu was startled to see a little fluctuation in the mist ahead. Then, an enormous shadow emerged from within the mist, and rushed towards him at a very fast speed. The massive head of a snake extended from the dense mist. It was almost as big as a house. The snake's pupils were emitting a strange red radiance, like a pair of lanterns. In addition, there were 2 bulges on either side of the snake's head, as if a pair of horns was about to grow out. The snake's massive body came into appearance. It was 20 or 30 feet in length. Its entire body was covered with a layer of bright red ring-like patterns. Hiss hiss, a hissing sound was heard as the huge black python flicked its red tongue out. The python then stared at the people below on the ground, and its huge eyeballs radiated ice-like cold radiance. It shot a white expanse shadow over the surrounding people's heads. And, the wisp of an indescribable spine-chilling spiritual aura made its frightening appearance, and plummeted down on the people. It pervaded the air over the gloomy swamp, and made it gloomier than ever. It was so oppressive that the people didn't dare to take a long breath. Shi Mu's complexion turned slightly pale. The spiritual pressure that the black python had just emitted was very close to that of Lord Xuequi's. The black python was apparently at the peak of the Earth rank primary stage. But, Shi Mu didn't make any moves. He instead gazed straight into the python's eyes with calmness. Shi Mu was still able to steady himself, but the others weren't. The red-ringed demon python, someone in the group took the lead, and shouted aloud. Then, he broke into a run, and fled into the distance. The others also fled into the distance when they saw that one of their companions had taken the lead. A cold look gleamed in the red-ringed demon python's eyes as it saw this scene. A sound like that of a gust of wind was heard. And, the python crossed over 100 feet of distance in an instant to catch up with a person. Then, it stretched open its big mouth, and bit the upper half of that person's body. A blood-curdling screech spread from the python's mouth. But, that screech resounded only for a fleeting moment. The python had raised its head, and swallowed down that person in this fleeting moment. The other people issued screams of horror when they witnessed this scene. Then, they accelerated their speed, and ran speedily. They seemed to be regretting the fact that they were born with only 2 legs. They were indeed very fast, but there was no chance of them surpassing the insane speed of the red-ringed demon python. Barely a dozen of breaths had passed when another one of them was devoured by the python. He was the fastest one in his group, and had covered 200 or 300 feet distance. However, Shi Mu stood still in the same place in a silent manner. He didn't take advantage of the situation to escape. Instead, a faint golden light flowed in his eyes, and he started to observe the slaughtering style of the red-ringed demon python in a calm manner. In addition, the real qi in his lower abdomen had long been circulating in his body at an incredible speed. The fact was that Shi Mu had just tried to summon Yan Luo, but he didn't receive the slightest response from it. So, he knew that he couldn't count on Yan Luo's timely help. Shi Mu couldn't even think of running away from here. It was because he knew that he wouldn't be able to run 1,000 feet from this monstrous python even if he stimulated the movement of his blue jade shuttle. Therefore, he thought that he'd better confront it with his full strength. Then, he might find a slim chance of survival in due course. The only person that remained in that group was that swordsman. But, he was also killed, and swallowed up by the python regardless of how hard he tried and struggled. After that, the python slowly turned its head toward Shi Mu. Do you also belong to the fierce snake tribe? I can sense the aura of the demon python's beast soul which is sealed in your body, a muffled voice spread from the red-ringed demon python's mouth. If you feel so, then that's exactly the case, Shi Mu replied. You're not like those people who broke into a run as soon as they saw me. In fact, you're rather courageous. But, you're bound to meet your death since you're also one of the fierce snake tribesmen. The monstrous python issued a sneer-like neighing sound while sticking its tongue out of its mouth a few times. The python's voice had barely faded when it made an abrupt jump. Its enormous body galloped toward Shi Mu along with the whistling sound of the wind. It was apparently not in the mood to drag a pointless conversation with Shi Mu. A black shadow flashed, and the bulky snake tail was whipped toward him with great force. The tail set off a gust of wind as it swept toward him. A black light flickered on Shi Mu's chest at the same time, and closely packed snake scales sprouted all over his body. Shi Mu had completed the totem body transformation in an instant. After that, circles of black light beams started to burst forth from his body. Simultaneously, his whole body released a wisp of enormous spiritual aura. The whistling tail of the python was about to fall on Shi Mu's body, but he didn't budge. He instead issued a low shout, and the real qi of his entire body gushed into his right arm. Then, he pounded his fist forward, and a black light burst out of his fist like a small black sun. Boom! A loud explosive sound burst into the air. The python's tail received a powerful jolt, and was thrown away as if it had knocked against a huge wall. However, Shi Mu had also been affected by the vicious attack of the python's massive tail. He was sent flying by the overwhelming effect of the tremendous force. In fact, he felt as if his body had been struck by a cannonball. He crashed to the ground almost 100 feet away from his original place with full force. This set off layers of splashes of muddy water in the vicinity. However, Shi Mu saw that the python was swaying its tail. It was apparently in great pain since several scales on its tail had shattered. I hadn't expected that a young boy with average cultivation could command such remarkable strength. However, this is where the buck stops for you. The python issued an infuriated hissing roar. And, its huge body swooped down toward Shi Mu. Simultaneously, the bright red ring-shaped patterns on its body gleamed magnificently, and its momentum increased to a certain extent. The python flew over to the place where Shi Mu had just crashed in a split second. However, it didn't see anyone around. Shi Mu had disappeared from there without a trace. The python was dumbstruck. But then, a green light glinted behind its body. And, a silhouette drilled out of the ground, it was Shi Mu. Shi Mu's complexion looked deathly pale, and a wisp of blood was flowing from the corners of his mouth. He was evidently not in a good condition after having sustained such a terrifying blow. However, an exquisite light flickered in his eyes, and his black blade exuded a blade light which shot up to the sky. Then, the black blade light appeared over the python's head, and swept toward it with a force that was as powerful as a thunderbolt. But, the python quickly swept its tail backwards. A peng sound was heard as the black light and the red light intertwined, and sent forth flickering light beams. The demon python's monster-like eyes congealed to see that the miraculous protective glow on the surface of its body had been shattered by the impact of the immense force. Moreover, the scales on its tail had broken, and a blood light had appeared there. Also, a wound had been cut open on the tail, and blood was splashing out of it. The red-ringed demon python issued a scream in anguish. A whistling sound was heard almost at the same time, and a small golden sword flew out of Shi Mu's mouth. Then, the sword inflated against the wind until it reached the size of a door. It then changed into a dozen or more sword shadows, and hacked towards the python. This golden sword wasn't a low-ranked weapon. Shi Mu had been nurturing it in a warm temperature over this period of time. So, the greater part of its spiritual property had been restored by now. Moreover, its power had also substantially increased. Ka-cha! The python felt a huge spiritual pressure cascading down on its body. And, the miraculous protective glow on its body collapsed once again. Then, the golden sword shadow thrust into its body, and cut open a huge wound therein. Fresh blood splattered in all directions as a result. Hiss! The python sent out a thunderous roar, and its huge head appeared in front of Shi Mu the next moment. Then, its big and ferocious mouth parted wide open, and spurted out a green liquid substance straight toward Shi Mu. The green substance hadn't arrived yet, but a whiff of an unpleasant odor hit Shi Mu head on. That's very poisonous. Shi Mu was alarmed. He slammed his foot on the ground, and shot back at lightning speed. Shi Mu dodged the attack, but his arm still got stained with it a bit. Consequently, his clothes eroded due to the corrosive potency of the liquid. His black scales also issued a chi-chi sound as the python's venom dropped on them. Fortunately, these black scales were the three-headed ominous python's scales. So, they had a very high resistance to such venom. Shi Mu's fingers moved a bit in order to stimulate a magic spell. And, several shadows of the golden sword started to hover around in midair. Then, they turned into a door-sized large sword, and hacked toward the python once again. The trace of an alarmed look finally surfaced in the python's eyes. Apparently, it hadn't anticipated that the power of Shi Mu's spirit tool could be so overwhelming. Its huge body coiled into a multi-layered cake-like structure. Then, the two bulges on the top of its head flickered, and an arrow-like red light burst out of them. The red light dashed, and collided with the golden sword head-on. The golden flying sword was struck, and sent flying with a loud bang sound the next moment. The tensed expression in the python's eyes loosened a bit as it noticed that its primary magic power was capable enough to withstand this fierce flying sword. It felt a great relief in its heart as this thought crossed its mind. Suddenly, a whistling sound spread again, but from another side this time. The python turned its head only to see a jade-blue shuttle floating under Shi Mu's feet. Moreover, Shi Mu had already pounced over in front of it while holding two weapons in his hands, a blade and a stick. The black blade and the stick flashed simultaneously, and a blade light and a stick shadow came into appearance. Then, they fell on the python's body like layers of mighty surging waves. The degree of sharpness and hardness of the present black blade had far surpassed the previous black blade even though it had been stripped off its magic formula. The python felt a wisp of a massive and seemingly irresistible force. It had spread from the blade light and stick shadow which were about to touch its body. And, several long and deep scars were inflicted on its body by the black blade the next moment. Simultaneously, many of the scales on the surface of its body were crushed to fragments by the stick shadow. "How dare you injure me? I'll skin you, and swallow you alive. Otherwise, I will never be able to shake off the hatred that has emerged in my heart." The python issued a loud roar filled with resentment. Then, a spurt of red light burst out of its body, and condensed into a massive virtual python shadow. The virtual shadow then shrouded its entire body. The python spun round like a spinning top next moment. And, its tail swayed up and down, and formed an enormous red criss-crossed shadow in the sky. Then, its tail swept towards Shimu to thrash him. That's not good. Shimu was alarmed by this. The long blue shuttle under his feet shone brightly, and flew backwards. However, it was already too late. He had barely moved a few feet back when he was caught, and thrashed by the red shadow which had spread everywhere in the sky. Puff! A mouthful of blood gushed out of Shimu's mouth. Then, he sustained several directs hit by the python tail in a short moment. His real chi as well as his scales collapsed and dissipated one after another. His body was eventually struck, and sent flying in the air once again. A gleam of joy flashed through the python's eyes. It then stretched its tail, and caught up with Shimu almost instantly. Then, its tail grabbed Shimu, and rolled his body back to it. Then, the python opened its huge and ferocious mouth as if it wanted to bite Shimu, and split him in two parts. All Shimu felt at this moment was the immense force that had fallen upon him. However, he clenched his teeth, and tried to move on of his hands in order to stimulate at the last moment. The golden sword in the air suddenly brightened up. Then, it thrust toward one of the python's eyes with a shrill and ear-piercing sound. Shimu wanted to embrace the plan of bilateral loss and injury at this juncture. The fear of the golden sword still had a strong clutch on the red-ringed demon python's heart. Therefore, it immediately gave up the thought of tearing at Shimu. The two bulges on the top of its head radiated bright red light, and condensed into a long and arrow-shaped red light. Then, this red light struck toward the golden flying sword. Meanwhile, the python's huge body twisted, and drew back. It obviously wanted to crush Shimu to death with its full strength. Then, a wisp of inexplicable force suddenly pressed down on Shimu, and made his complexion turn red. Shimu felt as if he was on the brink of suffocation due to this irresistible pressure. His whole body should have been crushed to death by now, but it hadn't happened. This was because his body had gone through many painstaking body tempering sessions during the practice of the 6 layers of the art of breeding strong evil ape. In addition, he had already resorted to the totem body transformation while fighting with this demon python. However, it seemed that he wouldn't be able to endure this overwhelming force for long.